Here's something that happens 10,000 times a day and almost nobody talks about it. A customer calls in upset about a late delivery. The agent on the other end knows the product cold, knows the policy, knows exactly how to fix the problem, and still 30 seconds into the call, the customer's tone changes. They get sharper, more impatient, more likely to ask for a supervisor. Not because the agent didn't know the answer, because of how the sentence carrying that answer was built. One wrong verb, one missing word, one small slip that a customer's brain catches before their ears even finish processing it. And in that half second, trust drops, not because the customer is a grammar teacher, because humans are wired to trust confidence, and broken sentences sound like uncertainty even when the person speaking is completely certain about what they are saying. That's what we are spending the next 3 hours on. Not grammar as a subject you studied in school and forgot, grammar as a live, moving part of a real phone call where every sentence is doing a job and small mistakes quietly cost you that job. We are going to walk through the mistakes that beginners make most often on live customer calls, why they happen, why they matter more than people think, and exactly how to fix them one at a time in a way that sticks. Before we go further, let's be honest about something, because I think it will change how you listen to everything that comes after this. Most of the grammar mistakes we are going to cover are not signs that someone doesn't know English. They are signs that someone learned English the way it's taught in a classroom, and now they are using it in a completely different environment, live, unscripted, under pressure, with a stranger on the other end who is often already a little frustrated, because before the call even started, classroom English gives you time. You can pause, think, correct yourself, ask the teacher. A live call gives you none of that. The sentence has to come out right in real time while you are also listening, typing, checking a screen, and managing a human being's emotions. That is an enormous amount of mental load, and grammar mistakes usually show up exactly where that load gets heaviest. So if you have ever finished a call and thought, why did I say it wrong? I know this rule. I have known it for years. Here's the answer. Knowing a rule and producing it correctly under pressure are two completely different skills. This podcast is built around closing that exact gap. Let's start with a promise, because you deserve to know what you are getting out of the next 3 hours before you commit to them. By the end of this, you will understand the 10 or so grammar patterns that cause the vast majority of live call mistakes, not 50 scattered rules, a small specific set, because a small number of mistakes account for almost all the damage. You will understand exactly why each mistake happens, usually because of how a different language structures the same idea. You will hear the correct version and the incorrect version side by side over and over until the correct one starts to feel natural in your mouth, not just correct on paper. And you will get practical habits you can use on your very next call today, not someday. Here's a mistake I want you to imagine right now, because it's going to be one of the very first ones we break down properly, and it shows up on almost every single call in almost every single call center in the world. An agent says, I'm working here since 3 years. Say that sentence to yourself. I'm working here since 3 years. It sounds fine, doesn't it? It sounds fine because in many languages that exact structure is completely correct. But in English, that sentence is quietly broken, and a native ear notices it instantly, even if they can't explain why. The correct version is, I have been working here for 3 years. Small change, huge difference in how polished and confident that sentence sounds to the person listening. Why does this matter so much on a live call, especially more than it would matter in an email or a chat message, because on the call the customer cannot see you, they cannot see your face, your body language, your professionalism, your training certificate on the wall behind you. Your voice and the words carried by that voice are the entire experience. That's it. That's the whole relationship for the next however many minutes. When something is that voice, something in that voice sounds slightly off, the customer's brain fills in the gap with an assumption, and the assumption is almost never generous. They assume you are new, they assume you might not know the policy, they assume this call is going to take longer than it should. None of that may be true, but perception moves faster than facts on a live call, and grammar is one of the biggest drivers of perception. I want to tell you about a training session I watched once because it completely reframed how I think about this. A trainer stood in front of a room of brand new agents, all of them smart, all of them had already passed a fairly difficult English assessment to even be sitting in that room. She played two recordings back to back, same information, same resolution, same friendly tone. The only difference was that the first recording had three small grammar slips scattered through it, and the second recording didn't. She asked the room, which agent do you trust more? Every single hand went up for the second recording. Then she asked which agent gave you more information, and the room went quiet because the information was identical. That's the whole lesson right there. Grammar doesn't just carry information, it carries an impression of competence that sits on top of the information, and customers respond to that impression whether they realize it or not. So let's get into it properly, starting with the mistake that shows up more than any other single mistake on live calls anywhere in the world, and that's verb tense, specifically the confusion between simple past, present perfect and present continuous. If you only fix one thing from this entire 3 hours, this is the one that will move the needle the most, because it appears in almost every single call multiple times, in almost every single sentence structure an agent uses. Let's slow down and actually understand what these three tenses are doing, because once you understand the job each one does, the mistakes basically fix themselves. Simple past is for something that started and finished at a specific point in time that's already over. I checked your account yesterday. Done. Finished. Yesterday is closed. Present perfect is for something that started in the past and is still connected to now, either because it's still happening or because its effect is still relevant right now. I have checked your account, meaning just now, and the result is relevant to this conversation we are having right this second. Present continuous is for something happening right now in this exact moment and around this exact period of time. I'm checking your account, meaning literally at this second while we are talking. Now here's where it goes wrong on calls, and I want you to really picture this happening, because you have probably heard it or said it dozens of times without noticing. An agent needs to buy a few seconds while they pull up account information. In English, the natural thing to say is, I'm checking your account now, one moment please. But very often that comes out instead, what comes out instead is, I'm checking your account since some time, or I check your account now, or I'm check your account. Each of these is a small collision between tenses. The sentence that's trying to be present continuous but gets tangled up with a structure borrowed from a different tense. The customer doesn't sit there analyzing grammar, but their ear catches the wobble, and a wobble in a sentence about your own account checking process reads as a wobble in the process itself. Let's take the exact example from before and really take it apart. I'm working here since 3 years. Why does this happen so often? because in a lot of languages the idea of duration, something continuing from the past into the present, is expressed using a present tense verb plus a word like since or a time marker. It's a completely logical way to build that sentence, and it works perfectly well in those languages. English doesn't do it that way. English insists on present perfect, have been plus for since to do this specific job. I have been working here for 3 years, or I have been working here since 2023. Notice the pattern. For goes with a length of time 3 years, 6 months, 2 weeks. Since goes with starting point 2023, last March, this morning. Here's a drill you can run in your head right now, and I would genuinely encourage you to pause and say these out loud, because saying it out loud is what moves it from a rule you understand to a sentence your mouth produces automatically. I have been helping customers for 2 years. I have been using this system since January. I have been on this call for 5 minutes. Let me pull that up faster for you. Say each of those slowly. Notice have been shows up every single time duration is involved. That's the anchor. Whenever you're describing something that started before now and is still true, whether it's your job, your experience with the system, or literally how long you have been on the current call, have been is very often the piece that needs to be there. Now let's flip to a different, equally common version of the same family of mistakes, where agents use simple past when they should use present perfect, specifically when talking about something that just happened and is still relevant to solving the customer's problem right now. Here's the wrong version. I checked your account, there is no issue. Here's why that lands slightly oddly to a native ear. Checked simple past technically closes the action in a finished moment. It suggests at some point this checking happened and now we are somewhere else. But the whole reason you are telling the customer this is because it's relevant right now, this second, to the problem they called about. That's exactly the job present perfect exists to do. I have checked your account, there is no issue. The connection between the checking and right now is preserved in the grammar itself, and it makes the sentence feel tighter, more immediate, more like you're actively working the problem in real time rather than reporting on something from a vague past. I know what some of you are thinking right now, because I have heard this exact pushback in training rooms. Isn't this too small a difference to matter? Checked, have checked. Does a customer really notice? Here's the honest answer. Individually, no, probably not. One slip in one sentence changes almost nothing. But live calls aren't made of one sentence. They are made of 40, 60, 100 sentences back to back at speed under pressure. And tense confusion doesn't usually show up once. It shows up as a pattern threaded through the whole call, and patterns are what customers actually perceive even when they can't name a single specific error. It's the accumulated texture of the conversation, and the texture is exactly what builds or erodes trust minute by minute. Let's talk about one more piece of this same tense family, because it trips up almost every beginner agent at least once a shift, and that's using present simple where present continuous is needed, especially in the exact moment of doing something for the customer while you are talking to them. I check that for you. I look into your account. I connect you to the right department. Every one of these sounds like a habit, something you do generally as a routine rather than something happening at this exact moment live while the customer waits on the line. The fix is almost mechanical once you know it. Add the ing, add the am, is or are, and suddenly the sentence locks into the present moment where it belongs. I'm checking that for you. I'm looking into your account right now. I'm connecting you to the right department. Please hold for just a moment. Here's a small story that I think captures why this particular tense present continuous matters so much on live calls, specifically more than almost anywhere else language gets used. Imagine you're the customer, you're approved, you're annoyed, your package hasn't arrived. You call in and the agent says, I check that for you. Grammatically, that phrase floats in a strange timeless space. Is it happening now? Is it something they generally do as part of their job? Is it going to happen? You genuinely can't tell from the sentence alone. And when a customer can't tell whether something is happening right now, their brain fills the silence with doubt. Compare that to I am checking that for you right now, one moment. That sentence plants you, the customer, firmly in this second, watching the agent actively work on your exact problem. It's not a bigger promise, it's the same promise, but it's anchored in time in a way the other version isn't. And that anchor is what present continuous is built to provide. So here's a simple mental checklist you can carry on to your very next call, and I would genuinely suggest running through it a few times today out loud before you're back on live calls, because rehearsal without pressure is what makes the correct version available to you when the pressure is actually on. Ask yourself three questions before certain kinds of sentences. Is this happening literally right now in this second? Then you likely need am, is, or are plus the ing form. Is this something that started before now and is still true and or still relevant right now? Then you likely need to have or has plus been plus the ing form for ongoing actions, or the past participle for a completed action whose result still matters. Is this something that was fully finished at a specific point in the past that's now closed? Then and only then simple past is the right tool. We are going to keep building on this exact foundation for the rest of this episode, because tense confusion connects directly into almost every other mistake we are about to cover, especially around how agents describe timelines to customers, promise follow-ups, and explain what's already been done on an account. But before we move into the next major pattern, I want you to sit with something for a second, because I think it's the single most useful reframe in this entire 3 hours. You're not bad at grammar. You're running a translation process in real time, converting a structure that makes complete sense in one language into a structure that works in a different one, while simultaneously listening, typing, and managing a live human being's emotional state. That is genuinely difficult. The goal for everything we are covering isn't to make you feel like you have been doing it wrong all along. It's to hand you a small number of very specific, very repeatable fixes, so that translation process starts happening automatically the way it already does for the parts of English you have long since mastered without even noticing. Now let's move into the next major mistake, that one that sits right next door to tense and shows up constantly in the exact same sentences we have been rebuilding, and that's subject-verb agreement. The small mismatch between a subject and its verb that quietly signals to a native ear that a sentence was assembled slightly too fast. Picture this exact moment on a call. A customer asks about a refund and the agent says the refund usually take 5 to 7 business days. Read that again. The refund take, singular subject, plural sounding verb. In fast live speak, this kind of mismatch happens constantly, not because the agent doesn't know that refund is singular, but because the sentence is being built on the fly, and by the time the verb comes out, the mental slot for it filled in the more generic unmarked form take instead of the marked singular form takes. The fix is small on paper. The refund usually takes 5 to 7 business days, but saying it correctly under live pressure every single time takes deliberate practice, not just theoretical understanding. Here's where it gets more interesting and more useful, because subject verb agreement mistakes on calls aren't random. They cluster around a few specific, very predictable situations, and if you know the situations, you can watch them specifically instead of trying to police every single sentence you say. The first cluster is long subjects, where several words sit between the real subject and its verb, and the agent's brain locks onto the word closest to the verb instead of the actual subject. The information on our website, including the terms and conditions, are updated regularly. Read it slowly. The real subject is information singular, but condition sitting right before our pulls the verb toward plural, because the ear grabs the nearest noun instead of the real one. Correct version: the information on our website, including the terms and conditions, is updated regularly. This mistake is almost never about not knowing that information is singular. It's about sentence length outrunning working memory in the middle of a live call. The second cluster, and this one is extremely common in customer service, specifically in words like each, every, everyone, everybody, and none, all of which feel like they should be plural because they are talking about a group of people but are grammatically singular. In English, everyone on our team are trained on this policy. Feels natural because everyone clearly refers to more than one person, but grammatically everyone behaves like a singular noun. So the correct version is everyone on our team is trained on this policy. Same logic applies to each customer receives a confirmation email, not receive. Every representative has access to that tool, not have. None of the charges is refundable in this case, though this one is genuinely debated even among native speakers, and none with is generally treated as the safer, more formally correct choice on a professional call. Let's practice this out loud together right now, because hearing the correct pattern repeated back to back is what starts to make it feel automatic instead of effortful. Each of our agents follows the same process. Everyone in the department has completed the training. None of these fees applies to your specific plan. Say each one slowly and notice each, every, everyone, and none are quietly pulling a singular verb behind them every single time, even though your instinct, especially if you are thinking about a group of people, might want to reach for the plural. There's a deeper reason this particular mistake matters so much, specifically in customer service, beyond just sounding polished, and it's worth naming directly. A huge number of sentences agents say on calls are exactly this shape: a policy statement, a description of a process, a reassurance about how the company generally operates. Our policy allows, our system generates, our team reviews. These are trust building sentences. They are the moments where an agent is essentially saying, here is how our organization works, you can rely on this. And because these sentences are so structurally similar to each other, a small agreement slip in one of them tends to repeat across several of them in the same call, which is exactly what turns one small grammar wobble into a pattern the customer picks up on even without consciously analyzing it. So here's a practical habit to build starting on your very next call. When you are about to describe a policy, a process, or something your company generally does, take a half second, mentally isolate the actual subject of the sentence, strip away every descriptive phrase around it, and ask, is this one thing or many things? Our policy: one thing, allow refunds within 30 days. The terms outlined in your contract: plural thing, allow for early cancellation under specific conditions. That half second pause costs you almost nothing in call handling time, and it's exactly the habit that, repeated across thousands of calls over months, quietly turns into instinct. Let's move to the next pattern now, and I want to warn you ahead of time. This one is sneaky because it almost never breaks the meaning of a sentence. A customer will understand you perfectly well even when this mistake happens, but it's one of the fastest, clearest signals to a native ear that a sentence was built by someone still translating in their head, and that's articles, the small words a, and, the, and just as importantly, knowing exactly when to leave them out completely. Here's why this one is so difficult, and I want to say this clearly so you stop blaming yourself for struggling with it. A huge number of languages spoken around the world simply don't have articles at all. Not in simplified version of them, not a different version of them, none. If your first language is one of these, there is no internal instinct sitting in your brain telling you when a is needed, because your brain never had to build that instinct in the first place. You're not making a careless mistake, you're missing a mental category that English speakers acquired so early in childhood they don't even remember learning it. That's an enormous difference, and it's exactly why memorizing the rule from a textbook rarely fixes it on live calls. The fix has to be built through repetition, the same way a native speaker built it, by hearing the pattern over and over until it becomes automatic. Let's hear the mistake in its natural habitat on a live call. Please hold, I will transfer you to right department. Read that again slowly. Right department. To a native ear, that sentence is missing a small word that needs to be there. The. I will transfer you to the right department. Here's the underlying logic, and once you hear it explained this way, it tends to click permanently. The signals, this specific one, the one we both now understand from context, not just any one of many. When you say the right department, you are telling the customer there is one specific department that handles this, and I am sending you there. Drop the and the sentence loses that specificity, and a specific confident sounding sentence turns into a vague, slightly uncertain one, though even though the underlying information hasn't changed one bit. Now here's where it gets genuinely useful, because articles aren't random, they follow a small number of patterns, and once you can spot the pattern, you can predict the article almost every time, even in a sentence you have never said before. Use the when you and the customer both already know exactly which specific thing you're talking about. The refund you requested, the order you placed last week, the department that handles billing. In every one of these, there's only one possible thing being referred to. It's been specified either earlier in the conversation or by the words right next to it, and that specificity is exactly what the signals. Use a or an when you are introducing something for the first time, something general, something that could be one of several possible things, not yet narrowed down to one specific instance. I'm going to open a ticket for this. Notice not the ticket, because this ticket doesn't exist yet. It's brand new, one of potentially many tickets that could be opened, and a is the word that signals here's a new, not yet specific thing. Once that ticket exists and you are referring back to the article flips, I have opened a ticket for this. The ticket number is 12345, and the ticket will update you by email. Notice the shift. A ticket the first time it's mentioned brand new and unspecified, the ticket every time after that now specific, now something both of you are tracking together. This exact pattern, the first time, the every time after, is honestly one of the single most useful habits you can build for live calls, because it maps almost perfectly onto how customer service conversations actually unfold. You introduce something, I'm going to send an email, you refer back to it, The email will arrive within 10 minutes. You introduce something else. I'm applying a discount to this order. You refer back to it. The discount will show up on your final invoice. Say those out loud back to back and notice how naturally the article shifts the second time. The same thing is mentioned. That shift is the entire system in miniature. Now let's talk about when to use no article at all, because this is the piece that trips people up most, precisely because it feels like something should be there and genuinely isn't. Uncountable nouns, general concepts, and plural nouns used in a general sense typically take no article whatsoever. We provide customer support around the clock. Not a customer support, but the customer support. Just customer support, because here it's being used as a general concept, a category of service, not one specific instance of it. Similarly, we value feedback from our customers, not the feedback, because feedback is general as a concept, doesn't need the specificity that demands. That specificity the demands. Here's a live call example that shows all three patterns colliding in a single, very natural sentence, the kind of sentence you might say 15 times a day without thinking about it. I'll send an email with the details, and you can also check feedback options on your account. Break it down and email brand new. First mention unspecified, which exact email among many possible emails. The details specific, both of you now know exactly which details we are talking about. The ones in that email, feedback options, general concept, no article needed, because we are not pointing at one specific set of options, we are referring to the general category. I want to give you a mental shortcut here, because trying to consciously run through formal rules in the middle of a live call is genuinely too slow to be useful. Instead, before certain nouns, ask yourself one fast question: is this one specific thing we both already know about? Reach for the is this a new general one of many kind of thing? Reach for a or an, assuming it's a countable singular noun. In is this a broad concept or an unaccountable idea or a general plural? Skip the article entirely. That three-way filter running in under a second is close to what a native speaker's brain is actually doing, even though they have never had to think about it in words. Let's talk about a mistake that sits right next to articles in that same family of small words that carry enormous weight relative to their size, and that's prepositions. Words like in, on, at, for, with, and to. Here's what makes prepositions uniquely frustrating, and I say this with real sympathy, because there is genuinely often no logical reason for why a particular preposition is correct in a particular context. In particular context, English prepositions are frequently a matter of convention rather than logic, which means you can understand every grammar rule perfectly and still get them wrong simply because the correct one wasn't the one your first language would have chosen for the same idea. Let's hear it happen on a call. I will look into the issue and revert you tomorrow. Revert you by tomorrow. That sentence is completely understandable, and in some varieties of workplace English, particularly in parts of South Asia, revert is even used this way fairly commonly. But in most standard customer service English, revert is on its own carries a slightly different, more formal, less immediately clear meaning, and the far more universally understood version is I will look into the issue and get back to you by tomorrow. Small swap, revert you becomes get back to you, and the sentence lands cleanly for a much wider range of customers, including ones you might genuinely be confused by the other phrasing. Here's another one, extremely common and worth drilling specifically because it shows up constantly in exactly the moments agents are trying to sound most professional. I will explain you the process. Feels natural to say, especially if your first language allows a verb like explain to take a person directly as its object, but English explained doesn't work that way. It needs to in between. I will explain the process to you. Same words rearranged and suddenly it sits correctly in a native speaker's ear. This exact pattern explains something to someone, describes something to someone, suggests something to someone, is worth practicing as a small family, because these verbs all share the same structural requirement, and once you drill one, the other two tend to fall into place alongside it. Let's practice a short run of these together, because prepositions genuinely respond best to repetition rather than rule memorization. I'll explain the process to you. Let me describe the options to you. I would suggest this plan to you. If that works, say each one slowly and notice to use shows up after the thing being explained, described, or suggested, never directly attached to you the way it might feel natural to place it. Here's one more preposition pattern that shows up constantly in customer service, specifically because it's tied directly to talking about time, and time comes up in almost every single call, whether it's delivery windows, refund timelines, or callback promises. In, on, and at, each attached to a different size of time, and mixing them up is one of the most common small slips agents make, especially when they are speaking quickly. Use at for a precise point in time, a specific clock time. I'll call you back at 3 o'clock. Use on for a specific day or date. Your order will arrive on Thursday. Use it for a longer period, a month, a year, a season, or a duration from now. Your refund will process in 5 business days. You will receive the update in March. Notice how these three sit right next to each other conceptually, and how easy it is under live call pressure to reach for the wrong one, simply because they are all doing something that feels similar, marking a point related to time. I'll follow up in Thursday feels almost right, but Thursday is a specific day, so on is correct. I'll follow up on Thursday. Your package will arrive on 5 days, also feels close, but 5 days is a duration, a span, not a fixed point. So in it is correct. So in is correct. Your package will arrive in 5 days. The pattern to hold on to is this: at zooms is tightest, a single moment on sits at the level of a day or date, and in zooms out widest, covering months, years, seasons, and spans of time counted forward from now. I want to pause here and tell you about something a supervisor once told me, because I think about it constantly when I think about why these small preposition slips matter so much, specifically in a refund or delivery context. She said when a customer is anxious about money or a missing package, they are listening for exactly one thing: when, not why, not how, just when. And if the sentence carrying that when is even slightly unclear, because in and on got swapped, or at and in got swapped, the customer doesn't relax. They ask again, sorry, did you say Thursday, or in 5 days from Thursday? And now you're spending extra call time re-explaining something you already explained once, purely because a 2-letter word landed in the wrong slot. Getting these small words right isn't about sounding fancy. It's about giving the customer the one piece of information they are most anxious to hear cleanly the first time, without making them ask twice. Now let's move to countable and uncountable nouns, because this pattern connects directly back to articles, and it shows up constantly in customer service, specifically around 2 topics that come up on nearly every single call: money and information. Here's the core idea: some nouns in English can be counted individually: $1, $2, 3 complaints, 4 tickets, and these are countable nouns. They take a or an in the singular, they take numbers freely, and they take plural forms with an S. Other nouns describe something treated as a mass, a whole, not divided into individual countable units, even if logically you might think it could be counted. Information is the single most important example in customer service because it comes up constantly and it is almost always misused the same way. Here's the mistake: live on a call. Can you provide me some informations about your account? Two things are happening in that sentence that a native ear catches instantly. Informations with an S and some treating information as if it's a countable thing you could stack up in individual units. In standard English, information is uncountable. It doesn't take a plural S ever, and it doesn't take a or an. The corrected sentence is, can you provide me some information about your account? Or even more naturally on a call, can you provide some information about your account? This exact mistake, adding an S to an uncountable noun, shows up on a small, very specific list of words that come up constantly in customer service. So let's drill that list directly, because memorizing this short list solves an enormous percentage of this particular problem in one pass. Information never informations. Advice never advises. I would advise, not I would give an advices. Feedback never feedbacks. Furniture less common in customer service but still shows up in retail context. Never furnitures. Equipment common in tech support calls. Never equipments. Software common in tech support calls. Never softwares. Even though it feels like it should behave like the countable word program on application. Luggage common in travel and airline context. Never luggages. Let's run through the corrected versions together out loud, because this is exactly the kind of pattern that needs to live in your mouth, not just in your understanding. I need some information to verify your account. Can I give you some advice on how to avoid this in future? We really appreciate your feedback. All of our equipment is tested before shipping. The software is currently being updated. Please make sure your luggage is stacked correctly. Say each one slowly and notice how naturally singular uncountable treatment sits on every single one of them. No plurals, plural S inside, no A or an in front. Here's a quick practical trick for telling countable and uncountable nouns apart in the middle of a live call. When you genuinely don't have time to think about grammar theory, ask yourself, can I put a specific number directly in front of this word and have it make sense? Two complaints. Yes, completely natural. Complaint is countable. Two informations. No, that doesn't work, which tells you information is uncountable. Three tickets. Yes, countable. Three furnitures. No, that doesn't work. Furniture is uncountable, and even though individual chairs and tables obviously are countable, the general category furniture are as a word isn't. That single test, can I put a number directly in front of it, will correctly sort the vast majority of nouns you will encounter on customer service calls, and it takes about 1 second to run mentally. Let's zoom out for a moment, because I think it's worth naming the thread connecting everything we have covered so far: tenses, subject, verb, agreement, articles, prepositions, and now countable versus uncountable nouns. Every single one of these mistakes is small on its own. None of them individually would cause a customer to misunderstand you or fail to get help. That's actually the trap, and it's why so many agents underestimate how much these mistakes matter. It's not any one mistake doing damage, it's the accumulated effect of many small ones stacked across a single call that quietly shapes whether a customer walks away thinking that a smooth professional experience, or something about that felt a little off. I'm not sure I trust it. You are not being graded on perfection. You are being heard sentence after sentence, and small consistent polish across dozens of sentences is what builds the kind of confidence that makes a customer relax, trust the solution you're giving them. and get off the call satisfied instead of second guessing what they just heard. Let's move into the next pattern, and this one is a little different from everything we have covered so far, because it's not about picking the right word, it's about where you put the words you have already correctly chosen. Word order. English is what's called a fairly fixed word order language, meaning the position of a word in a sentence carries almost as much meaning as the word itself. Move a word two spaces to the left or right, and a sentence that was perfectly correct can suddenly sound tangled, even though every single word in it is spelled and chosen correctly. Here's why this trips up so many agents specifically, and it's worth understanding because it will stop you from feeling like the mistake is random. Many languages allow far more flexibility in word order than English does, because those languages carry grammatical information in other ways, through word endings, through particles, through context. So moving words around doesn't break meaning the way it does in English. When someone translates a sentence structure directly from a far more flexible language into English, word for word, the individual words can all be correct and the sentence can still land oddly, because English is relying on position itself to signal meaning, and that positional signal got scrambled in the translation. Let's hear it happen. Where you are calling from? That question live on a call is something almost every beginner agent has said at some point, often multiple times before it gets corrected. The individual words are fine where you are calling from, but English question order requires the helping verb are to move in front of the subject, you not stay behind it. Correct version: where are you calling from? Small shift, are moves from after you to before you, and the sentence snaps into place. This exact pattern, the helping verb jumping in front of the subject to form a question, is worth drilling directly, because it's one of the highest frequency mistakes on customer service calls, specifically given how many questions agents ask in a single call. What is your account number? Not what your account number is. Where are you located? Not where you are located. How can I help you today? Not how I can help you today. Do you have your order number available? Not you have your order number available. Notice something interesting. In the last one, do you have, because it points to a second version of the same underlying rule. When a sentence doesn't already contain a helping verb like is, are, can, or will, English inserts do, does, or did specifically to make the question work, and that inserted word takes the front position ahead of the subject. You have your account number becomes do you have your account number? She called yesterday becomes did she call yesterday? This piece inserting do, does, or did purely to build a question doesn't exist at all in a lot of languages, which is exactly why it's so easy to skip when speaking quickly. Let's practice a quick run of these back to back, because questions are genuinely one of the most repeated sentence types on any customer service call. You're asking for information constantly or getting this pattern automatic pays off across nearly every single call you take. Could you confirm your date of birth for me? Do you have access to your email right now? Would you like me to send that confirmation by text or by email? Can you hear me clearly on this line? Say each one slowly and notice the helping verb could, do, would, can sits right at the very front, immediately followed by the subject you. Now let's talk about a second closely related word order mistake. This one showing up not in questions but in something called embedded or indirect questions, which is a slightly more advanced structure but comes up on calls constantly. especially when agents are trying to sound extra polite by softening a direct question. Here's the mistake. Can you tell me what is your order number? Feels polite, feels like a reasonable way to soften what is your order number into a gentler request. But notice the collision. What is your order number is itself already a direct question. With is jumped in front of your order number, and you can't simply drop a full direct question in its direct form inside another question. Once you're embedding it inside, can you tell me, the inner part has to flip back to normal statement order. Can you tell me what your order number is? This is genuinely one of the trickiest patterns in this entire episode. So let's slow all the way down and rebuild it from scratch. When a question is standing on its own, the helping verb jumps in front of the subject. What is your order number? But the moment that same question gets embedded inside a softer, more polite frame, like can you tell me, could you let me know, do you know, I'm wondering, the embedded part loses its jumped order and goes back to normal statement order, subject, then verb. Can you tell me what your order number is? Could you let me know where you are located? Do you know when the package was shipped? I'm wondering if you have your account number handy. Let's hear the wrong and right versions side by side one more time, because this is exactly the kind of pattern where hearing the contrast repeatedly is what makes it click. Wrong, can you tell me what is your email address? Right, can you tell me what your email address is? Wrong, do you know where is the nearest store? Right, do you know where the nearest store is? Wrong, could you confirm what is the reason for the return? Right, could you confirm what the reason for return is? In every single pair, notice the exact same move is quietly slides from the front of the embedded clause back to its normal position right after the subject. Here's why this particular mistake matters more than it might seem to on the surface. Agents reach for these softer embedded question structures specifically when they are trying to sound extra courteous, extra professional, extra careful with a customer's time or mood. It's the exact sentence type you use when you're being at your most polite, which means ironically this mistake tends to show up most often in the moments an agent is working hardest to sound gracious and skilled, and that's precisely when a small word order slip is most likely to undercut the very impression the agent is trying to create. Let's move down into modal verbs. Can, could, will, would, shall, should, may, and might, because these small words carry an enormous amount of the emotional and professional tone of a customer service call, far beyond what their size would suggest. And getting them slightly wrong doesn't usually break meaning, but it very often changes how confident, polite, or certain an agent sounds, sometimes in ways that work directly against what the agent is trying to communicate. Let's start with a mistake that shows up constantly, mixing up can and could in a way that flattens the difference between ability and politeness. I can transfer you to billing versus I could transfer you to billing. These sound close, but they are doing subtly different jobs. Can generally states a straightforward capability or fact. This is something I am able to do. Could softens the statement, the same statement, adding a layer of politeness or tentativeness, often appropriate when you are offering an option rather than simply stating a fact. Neither one is wrong exactly, but agents sometimes default to could in moments that call for a more confident, direct can, and the result is a sentence that sounds slightly less certain than the agent actually is. I could definitely help you with that sounds a touch hesitant compared to I can definitely help you with that, even though the underlying willingness and the ability is identical. On a call, especially early on when you are establishing that you're capable of solving the customer's problem can is very often the stronger, more reassuring choice. Now, here's the flip side of that same coin. A mistake that goes the opposite direction using will in a spot where would sounds noticeably more professional and polite, particularly when making a request of the customer rather than a statement about yourself. Will you hold for one moment technically works but sits closer to a command than a request, especially without softer framing around it. Would you mind holding one moment, or would you be able to hold for one moment carries a noticeably more courteous request shaped tone precisely because would introduces a layer of hypothetical politeness that will simply doesn't carry. This distinction will for stating your own straightforward intentions, would for making polite requests of the customer is worth holding on to as a clean, simple rule you can apply almost automatically. Let's drill this pair directly because it's one of the highest impact modal patterns for anyone doing live customer service. Specifically, I will send you a confirmation email stating your own action will fits naturally. Would you like me to send that email or text? Making a polite offer to the customer would fit naturally. I will escalate this to my supervisor. Your own action will. Would you rather prefer a callback this afternoon or tomorrow morning? An offer to the customer would notice the pattern threading through all four. Will attaches to what yourself are doing. Would attaches to questions and requests aimed at the customer's preference. Now let's talk about should, may and might. Three modals that get blurred together constantly even though they are doing genuinely different jobs, and mixing them up on a call can accidentally shift the entire meaning of what you are promising a customer. Should generally expresses a recommendation, an expectation, or something likely based on normal circumstances. Your refund should arrive within 5 business days. That's not a guarantee, it's an expectation based on how things normally go. May and might both express possibility, something that could happen, with might generally signals a slightly lower degree of certainty that may than may, though in casual spoken customer service English the two are often used fairly interchangeably. There may be a short delay due to high volume. There might be a short delay due to high volume. Both are acceptable, both correctly signal this is a possibility, not a certainty. Here's where the real mistake happens, and it's worth naming directly because of how much it can affect a customer's expectations. Agents sometimes swap should, which suggests a fairly confident expectation, or might, may or might, which suggests genuine uncertainty, or the reverse, and the swap quietly changes the promise being made. Your refund may arrive within 5 business days sounds noticeably less certain, almost like the 5 day window itself is in doubt compared to your refund should arrive within 5 business days, which confidently commits to the timeline while still leaving reasonable room for delay. If what you actually mean is this is the normal expected timeline, should is very often the more accurate word, and reaching for may or might instead can accidentally undersell your company's reliability. Let's take a moment here for a short, honest story because I think it captures exactly why modal verbs deserve this much attention. A friend of mine manages a customer service flow, and she told me about a spike in follow up calls her team once got. Customers calling back within a day or two of their original call, asking essentially the same question they had already asked. When she dug into the recordings, the pattern she found wasn't about information being missing, it was about modal verbs. Agents had said things like your issue might be resolved by tomorrow, when the actual accurate expectation was your issue should be resolved by tomorrow. That one word swap might instead of should took a fairly confident standard timeline and made it sound like a coin flip, and customers hearing that uncertainty called back the next day just to double check, generating entirely avoidable extra call volume. One modal verb repeated across enough calls created a measurable costly pattern. So here's a simple mental model to carry forward. Think of these models sitting on a kind of ladder of certainty. Will and can sit near the top, expressing direct, confident intention or ability. Should sits just below that, expressing a strong, reasonable expectation based on how things normally work. May and might sit lower, still expressing genuine, open possibility, something that reasonably could go either way. Before you choose a model on a live call, ask yourself honestly, where does this fact eventually sit on that ladder? If you're stating something you're personally about to do, reach for will. If you're stating a normal expected outcome based on standard process, reach for should. If you're genuinely unsure and the outcome could reasonably go a different way, that's exactly when may or might are not just acceptable but the honest, accurate choice. Matching the model to the true level of certainty isn't just a grammar rule, it's a small act of honesty that helps the customer calibrate their own expectations correctly, which in the long run generates fewer confused follow up calls and a great deal more trust. Let's shift now to one more piece connected to modals because it comes up constantly right alongside them, and that's the mistake of adding to directly after a modal verb, which is one of the most frequent small slips on live calls. I will to check that for you. I can to transfer you now. You should to speak with billing about that. In every one of these, to has stuck in immediately after modal verb, will, can, should, and it doesn't belong there. Modal verbs in English are followed directly by the base form of the next verb. No to in between ever. I will check that for you. I will transfer you now. You should speak with billing about that. That this particular mistake often comes from a completely reasonable place because plenty of other verb structures in English do use to. I want to check that. I need to transfer you. I have to speak with billing, and it's an easy, understandable overgeneralization to assume modals work the same way. They don't, and this is genuinely one of the fastest fixes in this entire episode once you know to listen for it, because the fix is simply deletion. Remove the to and the sentence is instantly correct. Let's move into the next major pattern, one that's uniquely English in how strange it is, and I say that as someone who genuinely sympathizes with anyone learning this language as an adult, because there's no clean logic to it. You simply have to absorb it through exposure, and that's phrasal verbs. Verbs paired with small words like up, out, down, over, and through, where a combination means something completely different from their word on its own, from either word on its own. Here's what makes phrasal verbs so uniquely dangerous on live calls, specifically more than almost any other category we have covered. Get most other grammar patterns wrong, and the sentence usually still communicates the underlying meaning, just less smoothly. Get a phrasal verb wrong, and you can accidentally say something with a completely different meaning than the one you intended. Sometimes one that confuses the customer badly, sometimes one that sounds oddly casual or even rude in a professional context, purely because the small word attached to the word changed everything. Let's hear a real example of this going wrong on a call. I will look up your issue versus I will look into your issue. These sound almost identical, and an agent moving quickly can genuinely swap them into without noticing, but they mean different things. Look up generally means to search for a specific known piece of information. I will look up your account number. Look into means to investigate, to research a problem. More broadly, I will look into why your package hasn't arrived. Swap them and I'll look up your issue. Sounds slightly odd because issue isn't usually the kind of specific discrete fact you look up. It's more the kind of open-ended problem you look into. The customer will probably still understand you, but the sentence carries a faint mismatch that a careful listener notices. Here's another pair that gets confused constantly, specifically because both options sound like reasonable candidates for the same situation. I'll follow up with you versus I will follow through on this. These are not interchangeable, and even though they share the word follow, follow up means to check back later, to make contact again after some time has passed. I will follow up with you tomorrow to confirm everything is resolved. Follow through means to complete an action you have committed, to see a task all the way to its finish. I'll follow through on getting this refund processed. Mixing these up produces sentences like I'll follow through with you tomorrow, which blends the two meanings into something that doesn't cleanly land as either one. Let's build a short practical list of the phrasal verbs that show up constantly in customer service, specifically because a small number of these account for the overwhelming majority of phrasal verb usage on live calls. And getting comfortable with this specific list will cover you in the vast majority of real situations. Setup meaning to create or establish something. I'll set up a new account for you. Look into meaning to investigate. I'll look into this billing discrepancy. Get back to meaning to respond again later. I'll get back to you within an hour. Sort out meaning to resolve or fix. Let's sort out this delivery issue together. Hold on meaning to wait briefly. Could you hold on for just a moment? Put through meaning to connect someone by phone. I'll put you through to our technical team. Cancel out meaning to nullify this discount. Will cancel out the late fee. Bring up meaning raise a topic. I'll bring up something in your account history. Let's hear each of these used correctly in a full natural sounding call sentence, because the goal here is for the whole phrase verb plus particle to start feeling like a single unit in your mind rather than two separate words you're choosing independently. I'll set up a callback for you at 3 o'clock. Let me look into why this charge appeared twice. I'll get back to you by end of day with an update. We can definitely sort out this shipping delay together. Would you mind holding on for just one moment while I check that? I'm going to put you through to our billing specialist now. This account credit should cancel out the difference you were charged. There's something I want to bring up regarding your subscription renewal. I want to give you a genuinely practical strategy for handling phrasal verbs, because trying to memorize every single one along with every subtle shade of meaning is not a realistic goal for a live call environment, and honestly it's not necessary. Here's the strategy. Build a small personal set of phrasal verbs you are already completely confident and comfortable with, even if it's a short list, 10 or 15 of them, and lean on that trusted set heavily during calls rather than reaching for a less familiar phrasal verb you are not fully sure of. There is nothing wrong professionally with saying I will investigate this issue instead of I will look into this issue. If look into feels slightly uncertain to you in that moment, a slightly more formal single for word verb used correctly and confidently will always sound more professional on a call than a phrasal verb used slightly incorrectly. This isn't about avoiding phrasal verbs forever. It's about being strategic during live calls, specifically where the cost of a small mistake is higher than the cost of choosing a marginally more formal word. Now let's move to a different closely related category, one that shows up constantly in customer service, specifically because it deals with words that sound alike or are frequently confused even by people who have spoken English their entire lives. And knowing this short list could quietly eliminate a whole cluster of small mistakes agents make on calls every single day. Let's start with affect and effect, because this pair comes up constantly in exactly this kind of sentence customer service agents say all the time, explaining consequences to a customer. This delay will not affect your warranty. That sentence said out loud on a call sounds completely fine, but written down or heard by a careful listener, it's using the wrong word. Affect with an is almost always the verb, meaning to influence or impact something. This delay will not affect your warranty. Effect with an E is almost always the noun, meaning a result or outcome. The effect of this delay on your warranty is minimal. On a live call spoken aloud, the two words sound nearly identical, so this particular mistake matters far more in written communication, emails, chats, transcripts, follow up, or moves than in speech itself. It's worth knowing cold because agents frequently move between calls and written follow ups within the same shift, and the habit that's correct in one needs to carry over into the other. Here's a pair that actually does matter enormously in spoken customer service, because both versions sound completely different out loud, and mixing them up changes the entire meaning of the sentence. Borrow and lend. I will borrow you a replacement device while yours is being repaired. That sentence is backwards. Borrow means to take something temporarily from someone else. I would like to borrow your pen. Lend means to give something temporarily to someone else. I will lend you a replacement device. The agent in the first sentence is the one giving the device, which means lend is the correct verb, not borrow. This mistake happens because in several languages a single verb covers both directions of temporary exchange, and English insists on splitting it into two completely separate words depending on which direction the object is moving. Let's practice the correct direction a few times, because this is exactly the kind of mistake that once you drill the direction clearly, essentially never happens again. We can lend you a loaner unit while your device is being serviced. Could I borrow a moment of your time to pull up your account? Notice in the first sentence, the company is giving something to the customer, so lend is correct. In the second, the agent is taking a moment of the customer's time, so borrow is correct. The direction the thing moves toward the speaker or away from the speaker is the entire key to choosing correctly between these two words every single time. Here's a pair that shows up constantly in exactly the moment agents are trying to reassure a customer, and getting it backwards can genuinely confuse someone who's already anxious. Lose and lose. Lose and loss. Lose. If you lose your card, please contact us immediately. That sentence uses lose, which describes something that isn't tight or secure. A loose screw, loose clothing, when the intended word is loose, meaning to no longer have something. To misplace it, if you lose your card, please contact us immediately. These two words are spelled closely enough and pronounced closely enough that the mix-up happens even among fairly confident English speakers, so it's worth locking in specifically. Lose is the action of misplacing or no longer having something. Loose is the description of something not being tight or fastened. In a customer service context, you will almost want to lose because you're almost always talking about a customer potentially misplacing a card, a package, or an item, not about something being physically loose. Let's cover one more pair because it comes up constantly in exactly the sentences agents use to describe how a company operates or what it provides, and it's a mistake that quietly undercuts the professionalism of an otherwise perfectly good sentence. They're there and they are. We value their business with our company. Should be, we shall, we value their business with our company because there is the possessive form showing something belongs to them, their account, their order, their feedback. There of refers to a place, is used to introduce something existing. Your package is over there, or there is a delay in processing. They are is a contraction of they are. They are currently reviewing your case on a live call spoken aloud. These three words sound completely identical, so this mistake genuinely only matters in written communication. But since so much of customer service happens across chat, email, and call notes within a single shift, keeping these three cleanly separated in your writing is just as important as everything we have covered about speech. Let's pull together a short spoken drill of everything we have just covered back to back, because running through corrected versions in a row is exactly what helps a pattern move from something you understand to something you produce automatically under pressure. This delay will not affect your warranty. We can lend you a replacement while yours is repaired. If you lose your card, please contact us right away. We value their business with our company. Say each one slowly out loud and notice how naturally each corrected word sits in its sentence, doing exactly the job it was built to do. I want to take a short pause here because we are now roughly a third of the way through everything we are covering today, and I think it's worth naming something important about how all of this actually sticks long after this episode ends. Nobody listening to this is going to remember every single rule we have walked through word for word, and that's completely fine. That was never the actual goal. That's what sticks. What genuinely changes how you sound on your next 100 calls is exposure and repetition. Hearing the correct version enough times that it starts to feel more natural in your mouth than the incorrect version does. That's exactly why we have been saying corrected sentences out loud together over and over again rather than just listing rules at you. If you take nothing else from this episode, take this whenever you catch yourself unsure about a sentence mid call. Reach for the simpler, more familiar version you are completely confident in rather than a more complex one you are only partially sure about. Confidence, even in a slightly simpler sentence, reads as more professional to a customer than hesitation wrapped around a more ambitious one. Let's keep going because there's a lot more ground to cover, and the next pattern we are moving into conditional sentences. If this happens, then that happens is one that shapes an enormous number of the promises, policies, and troubleshooting steps agents deliver on calls every single day. Let's move into conditional sentences now. The if this then that structures that shape an enormous share of what happens on a customer service call, because so much of what an agent does is explain consequences, outline policies, and walk customers through troubleshooting steps. And all three of those things are at their core conditional statements. If you do this, then this will happen. If this is the case, then here's what we can offer. Getting these structures slightly wrong doesn't just sound less polished, it can genuinely confuse a customer about what's actually true, what's hypothetical, and what's a firm promise versus a loose possibility. English has a small number of conditional patterns, and each one signals a different relationship to reality, which is exactly why mixing them up matters so much. Let's build them from the ground up the way you would want to hear them explained if Nobody had ever walked you through this clearly before. The first type, often called the zero conditional, describes something that is always true, a general fact or a standard rule, and it uses simple present tense in both halves of the sentence. If a payment fails, the system sends an automatic notification. Notice both halves sit in simple present, fails, sends, because this isn't describing one specific event, it's describing something that happens as a rule every single time without exception. Here's where agents commonly slip on this first type, and it's worth catching directly. If a payment will fail, the system will send an automatic notification. Adding will to the if clause feels natural because will is so strongly associated with future outcomes in general conversation, but the if clause in this type of conditional stays in simple present even though it's describing something that could happen in the future. The will belongs only in the result half of certain other conditional types, not in this general, always true structure. If a payment fails, the system sends an automatic notification. Clean, simple, present on both sides. Now let's move to the conditional type that shows up more than any other on customer service calls, specifically because it's the one used for real, likely future possibilities, exactly the kind of thing agents are constantly describing what will happen if the customer takes a particular action. This is called the first conditional, and it follows a very specific, very learnable pattern. If plus simple present in the first half, will plus base verb in the second half. If you return the item within 30 days, we will issue a full refund. Notice a split. Return sits in simple present in the if clause. The will issue sits in the result clause. This exact split is one of the highest value patterns in this entire episode to lock in cold, because it appears constantly in nearly every explanation of policy, every troubleshooting step, every promise an agent makes about what happens next. Here's the mistake live on a call. If you will return the item within 30 days, we will issue a full refund. Will has crept into the if clause where it doesn't belong. This is genuinely one of the most common conditional mistakes across live calls everywhere, because will feels like the natural word to reach for whenever you are talking about the future, and a huge portion of these conditional sentences are in fact about the future, but English reserves will specifically for the result half of a first conditional, never the if half. The rule to hold on to tightly is this: the if clause always stays in simple present no matter how future facing the overall meaning of the sentence is. Let's drill this pattern hard because it's worth the extra repetition given how frequently it comes up. If you provide your account number, I can pull up your order faster. If the issue continues after the update, please contact us again. If you upgrade your plan, you will get access to priority support. If the tracking number doesn't update within 24 hours, we will investigate further. Say each one slowly and notice every single if clause sits in simple present, provide continues, upgrade doesn't update, while every result clause carries the future marker will, can, or a direct instruction. Now here's a subtly worth understanding, because it explains why some correct sentences don't use will in the result clause at all, and knowing this stops you from overcorrecting into adding will everywhere. The result clause of a first conditional can use will, but it can also use can, should, or even a direct imperative and instruction depending on exactly what you are communicating. If you would like to proceed, you can confirm by saying yes. If the charge appears twice, you should contact your bank as well. If you are not satisfied with the resolution, please ask to speak with a supervisor. In every one of these, the if clause still sits firmly in simple present, but the result clause flexes to match the actual meaning, ability with can, recommendation with should, direct instruction with an imperative. The one constant, the anchor that never moves, is that if clause, always simple present. Let's move to the second conditional now, because this one shows up specifically when agents are describing something hypothetical, something that isn't currently true and is unlikely, rather than a real straightforward future possibility. This type uses if simple, if plus simple past in the first half, and would plus base verb in the second half. Even though confusingly it's not actually talking about the past at all. If you were on our premium plan, you would have access to 24-hour support. The customer isn't on the premium plan, so this is describing a hypothetical and imagined alternative reality, not a real future step they are likely to take. That's exactly why simple past were shows up here, not because the timing is past, but because English uses the past tense from specifically as a marker of distance from reality, a kind of grammatical signal that says this isn't currently true. Here's why getting first and second conditionals mixed up matters so much, specifically in customer service. It changes whether a customer hears something as a real available option or a hypothetical out of reach one. If you upgrade your plan, you will get priority support. First conditional tells the customer this is a real doable action available to you right now, take it and you will get this benefit. If you upgraded your plan, you would get priority support. Second conditional sounds noticeably more distant, more hypothetical, almost like upgrading isn't really on the table. If upgrading genuinely is a real available option for this customer, the first conditional is not just grammatically more natural, it's a more accurate, more inviting way to present a real opportunity. And reaching for the second conditional by mistake can make a completely available upsell or benefit sound like a distant fantasy instead. Let's practice telling these two apart out loud, because the distinction genuinely changes the emotional tone of what you're offering a customer. First conditional, real and available. If you switch to paperless billing, you will save on processing fees. Second conditional, hypothetical or unlikely. If we were able to waive that fee, I would let you know immediately, but our policy doesn't allow it in this case. Notice how naturally the second one signals this isn't actually possible. I'm imagining a version of reality where it were precisely because were and would together are doing the work of marking distance from what's actually true. Now let's touch on the third conditional briefly, because it comes up less often on live calls than the first two, but when it does show up, it's almost always in a specific recognizable moment, an agent explaining what could have happened differently in the past, usually while addressing a customer's frustration about something that's already happened and can't be changed. This type uses if plus past perfect, had plus past participle in the first half, and would have plus past participle in the second half. If you had contacted us within the return window, we would have been able to process a full refund. Notice this is describing a past situation that's now closed. The return window has passed and there's no changing that now, which is exactly the kind of finality had and would have are built to communicate. Here's a mistake that shows up specifically in this structure, and it's worth naming because it happens even to fairly advanced English speakers. If you would have contacted us within the return window, we would have processed the refund. Would have has crept into the if clause, where just like will in the first conditional, it doesn't belong. The if clause of a third conditional stays anchored in had plus past participle, never would have. If you had contacted us, not if you would have contacted us. This mistake is common enough even among native speakers in casual conversation, that you will actually hear it fairly often in everyday spoken English. But in a professional customer service context, keeping the cleaner, correct version if you had is worth the extra bit of care. Let's zoom out and pull all three conditional types together into one clean mental model, because I think holding them side by side is what makes the differences finally click into place permanently. Zero conditional, always true. Simple present plus simple present. If a payment fails, the system sends a notification. First conditional, real future possibility, simple present plus will or can or should. If you return the item, we will issue a refund. Second conditional, hypothetical or unlikely, simple past plus would. If you were on the premium plan, you would have priority support. Third conditional, an unchangeable past, had plus past participle plus would have. If you had contacted us sooner, we would have processed the refund. Four structures, four distinct relationships to reality, and once you can hear which one a situation actually calls for before the sentence, choosing the correct grammar becomes almost automatic, because the grammar is simply following the logic of what you are actually trying to say. Here's a short, honest search about why this specific pattern conditionals deserves the attention we have just given it. A trainer I spoke with once described a call she reviewed where an agent, trying to be extra careful and polite, said, "If we would be able to expedite this, we will let you know." That sentence blends two different conditional types together in a way that doesn't cleanly land as either one, and the customer, confused about whether expediting was actually happening or just a distant hope, asked the exact same question three more times during the call, getting increasingly frustrated each time. The agent knew the answer the entire time. The information was never the problem. The conditional structure carrying that information was tangled, and the tangle itself is what created the confusion. The repeated questions and the frustration, all from a sentence that was trying genuinely to sound careful and considerate. That story captures something worth carrying forward through the rest of this episode, and honestly through the rest of your career on live calls. Grammar isn't a box you check to sound educated, it's the actual delivery mechanism for the information and reassurance you're trying to give a real, sometimes anxious person on the other end of the line. When the delivery mechanism is clean, the message lands the first time. When it's tangled, even slightly, the customer has to work harder to extract the meaning, and that extra work shows up as confusion, repeated questions, and a subtle erosion of the confidence you are trying so hard to build. Let's move into pronouns now. The small words like I, me, he, him, they, them, that stand in for people and things we have already named, because pronouns cause a specific, very common kind of mistake on live calls, one that's easy to miss because it almost never blocks understanding, but it consistently signals to a careful listener that a sentence was assembled slightly too quickly. Let's hear it happen. Please send the documents to my colleague and I. That sentence sounds polished, almost extra correct, and that's exactly why this mistake is so widespread. It comes from agents overcorrecting, having learned somewhere that can sound too casual and reaching for I, instead assuming it always sounds more proper. But the test here is simple, and once you know it, this mistake becomes very easy to catch even mid-sentence. Remove the other person entirely and check whether the pronoun still sounds right on its own. Please send the documents to I sounds clearly wrong the moment my colleague and disappears. Please send the documents to me sounds correct. Add my colleague and back in, and the correct version is please send the documents to my colleague and me. This single test, removing the other person and checking the pronoun alone, solves an enormous number of pronoun mistakes on calls. So let's drill it a few more times because it's one of the most genuinely useful tricks in this entire episode. My supervisor and I will review this today. Remove my supervisor and I will review this today sounds correct. So I is right here because in this sequence the pronoun is the subject doing the reviewing, not just the object receiving an action. The manager assigned the case to Sarah and I. Remove Sarah and the manager assigned the case to I sounds clearly wrong. So the correct version is the manager assigned the case to Sarah and me. Notice the pattern. When the pronoun is doing the action, subject's position I is correct. When the pronoun is receiving the action, object position me is correct. The presence of another name right next to the pronoun doesn't change which one is correct. It just makes it harder to hear, which is exactly why the removal test works so well. Now let's talk about a pronoun mistake that shows up specifically in customer service because it involves a company referring to itself, and it happens constantly in almost every single call, sometimes multiple times per sentence. We has value your business or the company have received your complaint. Both of these mismatch a pronoun or noun with its verb. We takes a plural verb, have, not, has. We have valued your business. The company, a singular noun, takes a singular verb, has, not, have. The company has received your complaint. This connects directly back to subject-verb agreement, which we covered earlier, but it's worth calling out specifically here because company, team, department and organization are words that describe a group of people, which can make them feel plural even though grammatically in standard American English they are treated as singular. Our team is committed to resolving this quickly, not are committed. Our department has updated its policy, not have updated their policy. That last example actually surfaces another small but important detail worth pulling out on its own because it comes up constantly right alongside company and team, and that's the matching pronoun that refers back to them. Our department has updated its policy. It's not there because a department being treated as a singular noun needs a singular pronoun to refer back to it later in the sentence. This is a small detail, but it's exactly the kind of small detail that threaded consistently through a call builds a strong cumulative impression of precision and professionalism. Let's move now into a cluster of specific ready-to-use phrase fixes, sentences that show up constantly on live calls, almost word for word across every industry, every company, every kind of customer interaction, because these exact phrases get said so many times per day that getting them polished once pays off across essentially every single call you will ever take. Here's one that comes up in nearly every single call in some form, actually right at the very start. How may I help you today versus how I can help you today. The second version has the classic word order mistake we covered earlier. The helping verb needs to come before the subject in the question, how can I help you today, or the slightly more formal, how may I help you today. Both of these are fully correct, natural opening lines and worth having completely locked in, ready to go automatically, because this is very often the very first sentence a customer hears from you, and the first impressions on a call happen fast. Here's another extremely common one, usually said while pulling up account information. Kindly bear with me for a moment versus kindly bear with me for a moment. This one is a spelling and word confusion issue rather than a grammar one, but it's worth including here because it's so frequent, especially in written chat transcripts and call notes. Bear in this context means to endure or tolerate. Please bear with me while I look this up. Bare means uncovered or empty, a bare self or a bare wall. On a live call, spoken aloud, this distinction is invisible. Both words sound identical, but it's worth knowing code for any written communication that happens around the call. Here's a phrase that shows up constantly and gets tangled in a subtle but noticeable way. I apologize for the inconvenience caused versus I apologize for the inconvenience caused to you. Neither of these is strictly wrong, but the far more natural, commonly used version in professional English is simply I apologize for the convenience or I am sorry for the convenience this is caused. Adding caused to you specifically tends to sound slightly stiff and overly formal to a native ear, almost translated rather than naturally spoken. This is a good moment to remember something we touched on earlier. Sometimes the more natural fix isn't a grammar correction at all, it's simply trimming a phrase down to the version that native speakers actually use most often in real life conversation. Here's a phrase pattern that trips up a huge number of agents specifically because it involves a preposition attaching to a verb in a way that doesn't match a very reasonable, very common instinct. I will connect you with the right department versus I will connect you to the right department. Here's the honest answer. Both are used in real professional English and you will hear native speakers use either one, but connect with tends to carry a slightly warmer, more relational tone. I will connect you with someone who can help, while connect to tends to sound slightly more mechanical, more like a technical routing action. I will connect your call to extension 412 on a customer service call where warmth and reassurance matter. Connect you with is very often the marginally better choice, though neither is a hard mistake. Let's cover one more extremely frequent phrase because it comes up in nearly every call involving a wait or a hold, and it's worth having exactly right. Please stay online versus please stay on the line. The article the is missing is the first version, and this connects directly back to what we covered earlier about articles. The line refers to one specific already understood thing. This particular phone connection you and the customer are both currently on, and that specificity is exactly why the belongs there. Please stay on the line. I'll be right back with you. Let's run through a tight back-to-back drill of every phrase we have just covered because these particular phrases are worth having so automatic that you never have to think about them mid-call. How can I help you today? Please bear with me for a moment while I pull that up. I apologize for the inconvenience. I'll connect you with the right department. Please stay on the line. I'll be right back with you. Say each one slowly and notice how naturally polished, how ready to use each one sounds now. Exactly the kind of sentence you want sitting immediately available in your mouth without a half second of hesitation, the very first time a customer needs to hear it. I want to take a moment here to talk about something slightly different from grammar itself because it connects directly to everything we have covered so far, and that's the idea of a personal phrase bank, a small specific set of sentences you have drilled so thoroughly that they come out correctly every single time without conscious effort. Every experienced agent, whether they think about it explicitly or not, has one of these. It's not that experienced agents never make mistakes anywhere in a conversation, it's that the highest frequency moments of a call, the greeting, the hold request, the apology, the transfer, the close, have been said so many times, so consistently that they have become close to automatic, freeing up mental energy for the parts of the call that actually require real-time thinking, the specific problem, the specific customer, the specific solution. Building your own phrase bank deliberately by drilling the exact sentences we have covered in this episode is one of the single most efficient ways to improve your calls quickly, because you are concentrating your practice exactly where the highest volume of repetition happens. Let's move into reported speech now, because this pattern shows up constantly in a very specific, very high stakes moment on a customer service call. The moment an agent has to relay information from somewhere else, a previous agent's notes, a supervisor's instruction, a policy document, or even something the customer themselves said earlier in the conversation. Getting reported speech slightly wrong doesn't usually break understanding, but it very often makes an agent sound less organized, less in command of the details exactly at the moment they are trying to demonstrate the opposite. Here's the mistake live on a call. My supervisor said we can offer a 10% discount. When an agent is directly quoting word for word, that structure is fine. But far more often on calls, agents are paraphrasing, summarizing that someone else said, not quoting it directly, and that's exactly where the grammar needs to shift and frequently doesn't. My supervisor said we can offer a 10% discount. Spoken this way without the shift can sometimes sound like it's quoting the supervisor's exact original words, when what the agent actually means is a paraphrase delivered a few minutes or even few hours after the original statement was made. The more precise, correctly shifted version is, my supervisor said we could offer a 10% discount, with can shifting back to could, because the reporting verb said sits in the past, and the English generally pulls the reported information one step back in time to match. This pattern called backshifting is worth understanding clearly, because it follows a small learnable rule, even though it feels unfamiliar at first. When you report something using a past tense reporting verb, said, told me, mentioned, the tense inside that beings, that's what's being reported, typically shifts one step into the past as well. Present becomes past. The customer said I need this resolved today becomes the customer said they needed this resolved today. Present continuous becomes past continuous. She said I am traveling becomes she said she was traveling. Will becomes would. He said I will call back becomes he said he would call back. Can becomes could. They said we can process this becomes they said they could process this. Let's drill this pattern with sentences pulled directly from real call situations, because reported speech comes up constantly whenever an agent is relaying something from earlier in the same call, from a previous call, or from another department. The customer mentioned they had already tried restarting the device. The previous agent noted that the issue was still unresolved. My manager confirmed that we could extend the deadline by 1 week. The technician said the part would arrive by Friday. Say each one slowly and notice the consistent backward shift threaded through every single one. Had already tried, was still unresolved, could extend, would arrive. Each one pulled one step further into the past, matching the past tense reporting verb that introduces it. Here's an important exception worth knowing, because it prevents a very natural overcorrection when you are reporting something that's still true right now, a general fact, a standing policy, or something that hasn't changed ever since it was said. English often allows you to skip the back shift entirely, because shifting it into the past could accidentally suggest it's no longer true. The customer said their address is still the same. Notice is not was, because the address genuinely is still the same right now as you are speaking. If you shifted it to was, the customer said their address was still the same, it could subtly suggest the address has since changed again, which isn't what you mean at all. This is a subtle judgment call, but the underlying question to ask yourself is simple: is this still true right now? If yes, it's often fine, even preferable to leave the tense unshifted. Now let's move to a mistake that shows up specifically in another piece of reported speech, converting a question into reported form, because this combines two patterns we have already covered: reported speech and embedded question. Word order and getting both right at once takes a bit of extra care. The customer asked, "Why is my order delayed?" Reported directly, this becomes: the customer asked why their order was delayed, not the customer asked why was their order delayed. Notice two shifts happening simultaneously. Is shifts back to was, matching the past tense reporting verb asked, and the question word order flips back to normal statement order: why their order was delayed, not why was their order delayed. Exactly the same embedded question pattern we drilled earlier in this episode, now appearing again inside reported speech. Let's move now to a completely different pattern, one that's more about clarity and tone than strict grammatical correctness, and that's double negatives. Sentences that accidentally stack two negative words together in a way that either confuses the meaning or sounds noticeably less polished in professional English. I don't have no information about that order. Grammatically, in strict formal English, two negatives don't and no technically cancel each other out and produce a positive meaning. I do have more information, which is almost certainly the opposite of what the agent actually means to say. In practice, native listeners usually understand the intended negative meaning anyway, because double negatives are common in many casual regional varieties of spoken English, but in a professional customer service context, the cleaner single negative version reads as more polished and precise. I don't have any information about that order or have no information about that order. Either single negative version says clearly, cleanly, exactly what the agent means. This pattern shows up constantly around the word any versus no, and it's worth locking in as a clean simple pair, because the mistake almost always involves combining them incorrectly with a negative verb. We don't have no availability this week should be we don't have any availability week this week, or we have no availability this week. There isn't nothing we can do should be there isn't anything we can do, or there is nothing we can do. Notice the pattern is in both corrected pairs. A negative verb doesn't a connected negative verb don't isn't pairs with any or anything, while a positive verb pairs directly with no or nothing. Mixing a negative verb with no or nothing in the same clause is exactly that creates the accidental double negative. Let's practice this pair a few more times, because it's a small pattern that, once locked in, essentially eliminates this entire category of mistake from your calls permanently. I can't find any record of that transaction. We have no record of that transaction on our end. I don't see any issues with your account currently. There is nothing further needed from you at this time. Say each one slowly and notice every single sentence carries exactly one negative word, never two, and that single negative sits cleanly in exactly the position needed to communicate the intended meaning without any risk of confusion. Let's move to one more pattern before we take stock of everything we have covered so far, and this one is genuinely satisfying once it clicks, because it comes up constantly whenever an agent is comparing options for a customer. A comparison that shows up in nearly every upsell conversation, every troubleshooting choice between two solutions, every explanation of which plan or option might work better. Comparatives and superlatives, the most and est forms English uses to compare things. Here's the mistake, and it's extremely common precisely because the underlying logic feels so reasonable. This plan is more better for your needs. More and better are both already doing comparative work on their own. Better is already the comparative form of good, so stacking more in front of it doubles up a job that only needs to be done once. The correct version is simply this plan is better for your needs. This exact doubling mistake, stacking more in front of a word that's already a comparative, shows up on a short predictable list of irregular comparatives worth knowing. Cold good becomes better, not more better. Bad becomes worse, not more worse. Far becomes further, or farther, not more far. For most other adjectives, English splits comparatives into two camps based on length, and knowing which camp a word falls into tells you instantly whether to add a directly to the word or place more in front of it. Never both. Short adjectives, generally one syllable, sometimes two, take a directly attached. Fast becomes faster. This plan is faster to set up. Cheap becomes cheaper. The basic plan is cheaper than the premium one. Simple becomes simpler. This process is simpler than the old one. Longer adjectives, generally three or more syllables, and many two-syllable ones, take more placed in front rather than any change to the word itself. Expensive becomes more expensive, not expensiver. Reliable becomes more reliable, not reliabler. Convenient becomes more convenient, non-convenienter, not convenienter. Let's practice a quick run of natural, correctly formed comparisons pulled straight from customer service context, because these comparisons come up constantly whenever you're helping a customer choose between options. The annual plan is cheaper than paying month to month. Our premium support tier is more reliable for businesses with high call volume. This new process is simpler than the one we used previously. Express shipping is faster, but it's also more expensive than standard delivery. Say each one slowly and notice every single comparative form is doing its job exactly once. No doubling, no stacking more on top of an already comparative word. Superlatives follow the exact same length base split, just describing the single best or most extreme option among three or more rather than comparing just two things. Short words take est. This is our fastest shipping option. Longer words take most. This is our most popular plan among small business customers. And the same irregular words carry their irregular forms into the superlative too. Good becomes best, not most good. Bad becomes worse, not most bad. This is the best option for your specific situation. This is the worst possible time for the system to go down. Both use the clean, correct, irregular form. No more or more stacked on top. Let's move into gerunds and infinitives now. A pattern that's a little different from most of what we have covered so far, because there's genuinely no reliable shortcut for predicting which one a particular verb wants. You largely have to learn in verb by verb through exposure. But the good news is customer service calls lean heavily on a fairly small repeated set of verbs, so learning this specific set will cover you in the overwhelming majority of real situations. Here's what gerunds and infinitives actually are quickly before we get into the mistakes. A gerund is the ing form of a verb using as a noun, checking, waiting, updating. An infinitive is to plus the base form of a verb to check, to wait, to update. Some verbs in English are followed only by a gerund, some only by an infinitive, and some can either Some can take either, sometimes with a meaning change, sometimes without one. There's no single logical rule explaining which verb belongs to which category. It's simply a pattern built into English that native speakers absorb through repetition, exactly the same way you're about to. Let's hear the mistake live on a call. I recommend to update your account information. Recommend is a verb that's followed by a gerund, never an infinitive. So the correct version is, I recommend updating your account information. Here's a short high value list of verbs that show up constantly in customer service and specifically require gerund afterward, never to plus the base verb. Recommend, I would recommend checking your spam folder. Suggest, I would suggest waiting 24 hours before trying again. Avoid, please avoid using the same password across multiple accounts. Consider, you might consider upgrading to our premium plan. Finish, once you have finished updating your details, click submit. Please keep checking your email for the confirmation. Now here's the flip side, a list of verbs equally common on customer service calls that require an infinitive afterward, never a gerund. Want, I want to make sure this is fully resolved for you. Need, you will need to verify your identity first. Decide, we have decided to extend your trial period. Agree, the technician agreed to visit within 48 hours. Promise, I promise to follow up with you personally. Fail, the system failed to process your payment correctly. Offer, we would like to offer to waive that fee this time. Let's practice both lists together back to back, because hearing gerund verbs and infinitive verbs alternate is genuinely one of the fastest ways to build a working sense for which is which. I would recommend restarting the device. We need to confirm a few details first. Please avoid sharing your password with anyone. We have decided to process a full refund. You might consider switching to paperless billing. The courier promised to deliver by end of day. Say each one slowly and notice. Restarting and sharing. Sit right after recommend and avoid. While to confirm and to process, sit right after need and decided. There's no shortcut to feeling the difference except repetition. And the more you say these correctly formed pairs out loud, the more automatic the correct pattern becomes. Here's a small, genuinely useful group of verbs that can take either a gerund or an infinitive, but the meaning shifts depending on which one you choose, and this specific pair shows up often enough in customer service that it's worth knowing precisely. Stop, I stopped checking my mail means the checking itself came to an end, you no longer check it. I stopped to check my email means you paused whatever you were doing in order to check your email, an entirely different meaning. One action interrupting another. On a call, this distinction matters. We stopped sending paper statements tells the customer paper statements are no longer happen. While we stopped to review your account would describe pausing something else specifically to look at the account, a much less common thing to actually say on a call, but worth knowing. The difference exists because the wrong choice genuinely changes what you are communicating. Let's move to a final category now, spelling and pronunciation traps. Words that don't cause grammar mistakes exactly, but cause enough hesitation, mispronunciation, or written confusion that they are worth covering directly. Because customer service involves a huge amount of specific, very repeated vocabulary, and stumbling on the same handful of words repeatedly is one of the quiet, cumulative things that chips away at a customer's confidence. Let's start with a word that comes up on nearly every single call in some form and gets mispronounced constantly, specifically because its spelling doesn't obviously match its sound. Warranty, not warranty, with equal stress on both parts, but warranty with the stress landing clearly on the first syllable. Say it slowly a few times. Warranty, warranty, warranty. Letting the stress settle naturally onto that first syllable, because a hesitant or oddly stressed pronunciation of a word you will say dozens of times a day quietly signals uncertainty even about something you actually know perfectly. Here's another one, extremely common in billing and account context and mispronounced constantly. Receipt. The P is silent, completely silent. Receipt, not receipt. This one trips people more up, specifically because the spelling includes a P that simply isn't pronounced at all in standard English, and inconsistency that has no logical explanation. It's simply an inherited quirk of how the word entered English centuries ago. Practice it a few times. Receipt, receipt, receipt. Letting that silent P disappear completely. Let's cover a pair that's easy to mix up, specifically because they look so visually similar on a screen, which matters enormously in customer service given how much reading happens off account dashboards and scripts during live calls. Address with one D instead, actually a word that and isn't actually a word at all, though it's an extremely common typo. The correct spelling is address with two D's. Similarly, separate is a common misspelling. The correct spelling is separate with an A in the middle, not a E-A distinction worth knowing cold given how often agents need to type and read this exact word during account verification steps. Here's a pronunciation trap that shows up constantly in technical support and account security contexts specifically. Specific itself sometimes mispronounced as pacific, with a SP sound softening into a P sound. Practice the crisp spur SP at the front. Specific, 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 keeping that initial consonant cluster clear and distinct, because this word comes up constantly in exactly the sentences where precision matters most. Could you give me a specific date, or I need a specific error message to troubleshoot this properly. Let's cover one more word, extremely common in customer service and worth locking in specifically because it shows up in one of the very first sentences most agents say on nearly every call. Confirm. Stress lands on the second syllabus. Confirm, not confirm. Practice it slowly. Confirm, 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 letting that stress settle clearly onto the second half of the word, because you will likely say some version of this word: confirming an account, confirming an order, confirming a callback time, dozens of time across a single shift. Let's pull together a short rapid pronunciation drill for everything we have just covered, because saying these correctly, cleanly and confidently is exactly the kind of small polish that compounds across an entire shift of calls. Warranty, receipt, address, separate, specific, confirm. Say each one slowly, then say it again at a more natural conversational speed, and notice how much more solid and certain each word feels the second time through, once the correct stress and sound pattern is sitting comfortably in your mouth rather than being reconstructed from scratch under pressure. Here's something worth naming clearly before we move toward wrapping up everything we have covered today. None of these individual words or patterns on their own will make or break a call. A single mispronounced word, a single missing article, a single tense slip. Customers move past all of these constantly without a second thought, because customers are focused on their actual problem, not grading your English. What genuinely matters, what actually shapes whether a customer walks away from a call feeling confident and cared for, is the accumulated texture of dozens of small choices made completely, consistently across an entire conversation. That's exactly why we have spent this much time on patterns that might individually feel small: tense, agreement, articles, prepositions, word, order, modals, phrasal verbs, conditionals, pronouns, reported speech, comparatives, gerunds, and infinitives, pronunciation. None of them alone is the whole picture. together, drilled and repeated until they are automatic. They are what separates a call that feels smooth and professional from one that feels even slightly uncertain. Let's move into a pair of verbs that get confused constantly across customer service calls, specifically, precisely because in a lot of languages, a single verb comfortably covers both jobs, and English insists on splitting them into two separate, non interchangeable words, make and do. Here's the underlying distinction, and once it clicks, it tends to stay clicked. Make generally involves creating or producing something, bringing something into existence that didn't exist before. Do generally involves performing an action, a task, or an activity without necessarily producing a physical or concrete result. It's a fuzzy distinction in theory, but in practice, English has settled into a fairly predictable set of fixed pairings, and customer service calls lean heavily on a small repeated subset of them. Let's hear the mistake live on a call. I will do a note on your account, or let me do some changes to your order. Both of these reach for do in spots where make is the fixed correct choice. I will make a note on your account. Let me make some changes to your order. Notice note and changes are both things being created, what brought into existence a new note that wasn't there before, a modification to the order that didn't previously exist, and that's exactly the signal that pulls toward make rather than do. Let's build a working list of the make pairings that show up constantly in customer service, because this specific short list covers an enormous share of real situations. Make a note, I'll make a note of that for future reference. Make a change, we can make a change to your delivery address. Make a decision, take your time, there's no rush to make a decision right now. Make a mistake, it looks like our system made a mistake with this charge. Make an exception, I can make an exception in this specific case. Make a promise, I don't want to make a promise I can't keep, but I'll do everything I can. Make progress, we are making good progress on resolving this. Now let's build the equally important do list, the fixed pairings that reach for do rather than make, because mixing these up in the opposite direction is just as common. Do a favor, could you do me a favor and confirm your email address? Do your best, I'll do my best to get this resolved today. Do research, let me do some research into why this happened. Do a task, once I do this update, everything should reflect correctly. Do business, we have done business with this vendor for several years. Do damage, this outage may have done some damage to the stored data. Let's practice both lists together, alternating, because hearing make and do sit correctly next to their fixed partners back to back is exactly what builds the instinct for choosing correctly under live call pressure. I'll make a note of your preference. Could you do me a favor and hold just a moment? We can make an exception this time. I'll do my best to have this resolved by end of day. Let me make a quick change to your account settings. I need to do a little more research before I can confirm that. Say each one slowly and notice how naturally make and do sit in their fixed spots, never interchangeable, even though the underlying logic connecting them isn't always perfectly predictable from first principles. Now let's move to a closely related cluster, four verbs that overlap heavily in meaning but each carry a specific grammatical requirement, and getting them crossed produces sentences that are completely understandable but noticeably off. Say, tell, speak, and talk. Here's the core distinction. Say focuses on the words themselves and it's never followed directly by a person. You say something, not say someone. Tell focuses on communicating to a specific person and it's almost always followed by that person. You tell someone something. Speak and talk both describe the general activity of using language, and neither is typically followed directly by a specific piece of information the way say and tell are. Here's the mistake: live on a call. Please tell me if you have any other questions versus please say me if you have any other questions. The second version reaches for say where tell is required because a specific person, me, is receiving the communication directly, and say never takes a direct person as its object. The correct version is please tell me if you have any other questions. Similarly, can I say you something should be can I tell you something, or may I share something with you. Let's build a quick practical set of correctly paired sentences because this cluster of 4 verbs comes up constantly in nearly every single call whenever an agent is describing communication itself. The customer said the issue started yesterday. Notice said followed directly by what was said, not a person. Tell me your account number when you're ready. Notice tell followed directly by me, the specific receiving the information. I would like to speak with a supervisor, please. Notice speak describing the general activity, not attached directly to a specific piece of information. Can we talk through the options together? Notice talk and describing the general activity, often paired with through when discussing something in detail. Here's a small additional detail worth locking in because it comes up constantly in exactly the moment an agent is trying to soften a request or transition a conversation. Speak tends to pair with when referring to a specific person. I need to speak with my supervisor, while talk tends to pair with to or with somewhat interchangeably. Can I talk to you for a moment, or can I talk with you for a moment? Both fully natural. Say and tell, by contrast, don't take with or to before a person at all. Tell doesn't need it because the person comes directly after the verb. Tell me, tell him, tell the customer, and say doesn't take a person object at all, which is exactly why say to is the pattern used instead when you genuinely need to specify who something was said to. She said to me that the refund was processed. Though even here told is very often the more natural, more commonly used choice. She told me the refund was processed. Let's run one more combined drill, pulling together make, do, say, tell, speak and talk, because these 6 verbs correctly used cover an enormous share of sentences that make up a typical customer service call from start to finish. I'll make a note and do some quick research before I get back to you. Could you tell me a bit more about when this started? I would like to speak with you about a few options that might help. Let's talk through what happened step by step. The customer said everything was working fine until this morning. I'll do everything I can to make this right. Say each one slowly and notice how naturally each verb sits exactly where it belongs, doing precisely the job English has assigned to it, nothing borrowed from its neighbors. I want to pause here for a moment because I think it's worth acknowledging something honestly. We have now covered a genuinely large number of patterns, tenses, agreement, articles, prepositions, countable nouns, word order, modals, phrasal verbs, word confusions, conditionals, pronouns, reported speech, negatives, comparatives, gerunds, infinitives, pronunciation, and now make, do, say, tell, speak and talk. That's a lot to hold in your head all at once, and if you're feeling a little overwhelmed right now, that's a completely normal, completely expected response, not a sign that any of this is beyond you. Here's the thing worth remembering, and I want to say it clearly because it's the single most important idea in this entire 3 hours. You do not need to master every single one of these patterns simultaneously starting tomorrow in order to sound noticeably more confident and polished on your calls. Improvement in spoken language doesn't work like flipping a switch, all or nothing. It works like layering one pattern at a time, becoming automatic while you continue speaking, continue talking calls, taking calls, continue making the occasional mistake in the areas you haven't fully locked in yet. Pick one pattern from everything we have covered today, the one that felt most familiar, the one you recognized most clearly from your own calls, and focus specifically on that one for the next week. Notice it, catch yourself, correct it in the moment you can, and let it become smoother through simple repetition. Once it feels close to automatic, move to the next pattern. That's genuinely how fluency in any specific skill area gets built. Not through trying to fix everything at once, but through patient, repeated, targeted practice, one layer at a time, stacked carefully on top of what's already solid. Let's move into a pattern that's slightly different from everything else we have covered, because it's less about grammar in the strict sense and more about a specific skill that comes up on almost every single call, and that's saying numbers, dates, and account details out loud in a way that's clear, standard, and easy for a customer to follow the first time without needing to ask you to repeat it. Here's where this goes wrong, and it's genuinely common because the logic feels reasonable even though it doesn't match how English speakers typically say these things out loud. Your order number is 12345. Read digit by digit. That's completely understandable. And for account numbers, confirmation codes, and similar strings of digits, reading one digit at a time is actually the correct expected approach, exactly what you would want to do. But the mistake shows up specifically with phone numbers and larger round numbers, where English has a specific expected rhythm that differs from simply reading every digit individually. Take a phone number as the clearest example: 555 123 4567. Notice the natural grouping: 3 digits, pause, 3 digits, pause, 4 digits, rather than reading all 10 digits in one broken string. This grouping isn't arbitrary, it matches how phone numbers are typically written and mentally chunked by native English speakers, and reading them in this rhythm with small natural pauses between groups makes it dramatically easier for a customer to write the number down accurately the first time without needing you to repeat it. Here's a related pattern worth locking in, specifically around how English pronounces double digits inside a longer number. 225, said as 225 digit by digit, is completely correct and standard. But 200 inside something like a zip code or account number is sometimes more naturally grouped as 200 when the context calls for a round number rather than a sequence of individual digits. The judgment call here is genuinely about context. For identifiers like account numbers, order numbers, and confirmation codes, individual digits are almost always correct and expected. 12345, 512345. For quantities, prices, and amounts, the full number word is almost always more natural: $125, not $125. Let's talk specifically about dates, because this is one of the most common places American customer service calls diverge sharply from how dates are spoken and written in many other parts of the world. And getting this specific pattern right matters enormously for avoiding real practical confusion, not just polish. In standard American English, dates are spoken and typically written with month first, then day, then year. March 5th, 2026, not the 5th of March, and written numerically 3/5/2026, not 5/3/2026. This matters far beyond grammar because a customer confirming a delivery date, a billing date, or an appointment needs the month and day in the order they are expecting, and a reversed order can genuinely cause a customer to write down or expect the wrong date entirely, not just sounds slightly foreign. Here's how this shows up as a live mistake. Your delivery is scheduled for the 5th of March. Understandable, completely clear in meaning, but noticeably non-standard for American customer service, specifically where the far more common expected phrasing is your delivery is scheduled for March 5th or March the 5th. Both of these lead with the month matching the pattern. American customers are used to hearing and expecting. Let's practice reading a few full dates out loud the way they are most naturally said in American customer service, specifically because this exact skill comes up constantly in delivery, confirmations, billing cycles, appointment scheduling, and callback promises. Your appointment is confirmed for April 12th at 2:30 in the afternoon. Your next billing date will be July 1st. We expect your refund to process by June 20th. Say each one slowly and notice month comes first every single time, followed by the day in this specific expected American order. Now let's talk about years specifically because there's a distinct pattern of how they are spoken and it trips people up in a slightly different way than months and days do. 1995 is said as 1995 split into two digit chunks, not 1995 and not 1995 read digit by digit. 2026 is said as 2026 following the exact same two-chunk pattern. This two-chunk rhythm for years is deeply embedded in how English speakers process dates and reading a year digit by digit, or as one single large number immediately sounds noticeably unnatural even though the underlying information is completely accurate either way. Let's shift now to a genuinely different topic, but one that connects closely to everything we have built so far, and that's formality calibration. Choosing the right level of politeness and formality for a given moment in a call, because this is a place where agents commonly overcorrect, reaching for language that's technically correct but noticeably stiffer and more distant than what the moment actually calls for. Here's the mistake, and it's extremely common, especially among agents who have been specifically trained to sound professional and end up understandably overshooting into something closer to overly formal. Kindly revert back to us at your earliest convenience regarding the aforementioned matter. Every single word in that sentence is technically correct English, but strung together it reads as noticeably stiff, almost bureaucratic in a way that can actually create distance from a customer rather than building the warmth and trust a good call depends on. A far more natural, equally professional version is simply please get back to us whenever you can regarding this issue. This pattern reaching for unnecessarily formal, almost archaic sounding words shows up on a small predictable list worth knowing directly, because swapping each one for its more natural, equally professional alternative instantly makes a sentence sound warmer and more genuinely helpful without sacrificing any professionalism at all. Kindly in most customer service contexts simply becomes please revert in the sense of responding becomes get back to or respond. Aforementioned becomes this or that, referring back to whatever was already named at your earliest convenience becomes whenever you can or as soon as possible. Regarding becomes about per our conversation becomes as we discussed. Let's hear the full transformation side by side, because the contrast really does capture something worth internalizing. Kindly revert back to us at your earliest convenience regarding the aforementioned matter. Versus, please get back to us whenever you can about this. Same core request, same level of genuine professionalism, but the second version sounds like a real person talking to another real person, while the first sounds like it was assembled from a formal template, and customers almost universally respond more warmly to the version that sounds like a real person. Here's an honest, important nuance worth deeming, because I don't want to leave you with the impression that formal language is always wrong. It isn't. There are absolutely moments on a call where a slightly more formal register is appropriate, delivering serious news, addressing a legal or compliance matter, speaking with a visibly upset customer who needs to feel taken very seriously. The goal isn't to strip all formality out of every sentence, it's to match the formality of your language to the actual emotional and situational needs of the moment, rather than defaulting to maximum formality everywhere out of an understandable but misplaced instinct that more formal automatically means more professional. Often the warmest, clearest, most genuinely professional thing you can say is also the simplest one. Let's close this section with a short practical test you can run in your head mid call. Whenever a sentence starts to feel a little stiff coming out of your mouth, would I say this exact sentence to a friend or family member if I were explaining the same thing to them, just slightly more politely? If the honest answer is no, that sentence probably wouldn't survive contact with a real casual conversation. It's worth asking whether a simpler, more natural version would communicate exactly the same information exactly as professionally, while sounding noticeably more human, more warm, and more genuinely reassuring to the person on the other end of the call. Let's cover a few more quick high frequency patterns before we move toward wrapping everything together, starting with less and fewer, a pair that gets mixed up constantly, including honestly among native English speakers in casual conversation, but is worth getting right in a professional customer service context specifically. Here's the underlying rule, and it connects directly back to something we covered earlier: countable versus uncountable nouns. Fewer is used with countable nouns, things you can count individually. Fewer complaints, fewer tickets, fewer errors. Less is used with uncountable nouns, things treated as a mass or a general amount. Less time, less information, less effort. Here's the mistake: live on a call. We have had less issues with this product since the update. Issues is countable. You can count one issue, two issues, three issues, which means fewer, not less is correct. We have had fewer issues with this product since the update. Let's practice a few of these side by side, because the countable and uncountable distinction, once you are listening for it specifically in this pair, becomes fairly easy to apply consistently. We have received fewer complaints this month. Countable complaints: we need less time to process this now. Uncountable time: there are fewer steps in the new process. Countable steps: this plan requires less paperwork overall. Uncountable paperwork. Say each one slowly and notice fewer consistently pairs with something you could count on your fingers, while less pairs with something treated as a continuous whole, not divided into individual countable units. Here's a closely related pair: much and many, following the exact same underlying logic. Many pairs with countable nouns: many customers, many options, many tickets. Much pairs with uncountable nouns: much time, much information, much progress. How much complaints did you receive today? Mixes this up. Complaints are countable, so the correct version is: how many complaints did you receive today? This pair matters specifically in questions which come up constantly on calls. How many options do you have? Not how much options. How much time do you need? Not how many time. Let's move to a phrase that shows up constantly, specifically in the moment an agent is trying to reference something the customer mentioned or something related to a topic, and it's small formality mismatch worth knowing, connecting directly back to what we covered earlier about natural versus overly formal phrasing in regards to your request versus regarding your request, about your request, in regards to is technically acceptable in most some varieties of English, but the cleaner, more standard, more widely accepted professional version drops the extra words entirely. Regarding your request, we can offer the following options, or even more naturally on a spoken call about your request. Here's what we can do. Let's talk about advise and advice specifically, because this pair causes constant confusion and it connects to something we touched on much earlier with affect and effect, a verb and noun pair that sound close but are spelled and used differently. Advice with an S is the verb, meaning to give guidance or a recommendation. I would advise checking your spam folder first. Advice with a C is the noun, the guidance itself. Here's some advice that might help going forward. The mistake shows up when these get crossed. I would advise you to check your spam folder using the noun where the verb belongs. The correct version keeps advise with an S in verb position. On a live call spoken aloud, these two words sound almost identical, so this distinction matters most in written communication, chat responses, email follow-ups, and call notes, where the spelling difference becomes visible. Now let's move into something a little different and genuinely important, because it's not about avoiding mistakes at all. It's about what to do in the moment when a mistake happens anyway, live mid sentence in front of a customer, because it will happen and will to every single agent, no matter how much practice and preparation goes into a call. This is the skill of graceful self-correction, and it's honestly just as valuable as everything else we have covered today, because how you handle a mistake in the moment matters just as much as whether you make one in the first place. Here's what tends to happen instinctively, and it's almost always the wrong instinct. An agent catches themselves mid-mistake, panics slightly, and either stumbles through an awkward, drawn-out correction. Sorry, I mean sorry, let me say that again, sorry, or worse, freezes completely, leaving an uncomfortable, obvious silence while they mentally regroup. Both of these draw far more attention to the small mistake than the mistake itself ever would have on its own, and both noticeably disrupt the confident, steady tone that builds a customer's trust throughout a call. Here's what a graceful correction actually sounds like. Instead, it's worth practicing this exact pattern until it feels completely natural, because you will need it regularly throughout your career. Catch the mistake, correct it briefly and calmly without over apologizing, and keep moving forward in the same steady tone you were already using. I checked your account. Sorry, I mean I have checked your account and everything looks correct. Notice how brief that correction is. One small pause, one clean correction, immediately followed by continuing the sentence forward with no extended apology, no visible embarrassment, no drawn out hesitation. Let's practice this exact pattern a few times, because self-correction done smoothly is honestly one of the most reassuring things a customer can hear, precisely because it signals confidence and control. Even in the middle of an imperfect moment, your refund will process in sorry, within 5 business days. I'm going to transfer you to actually let me handle this myself. It will be faster. This should resolve. Let me rephrase that. That should resolve the issue completely. Say each one slowly and notice the correction itself takes less than a second. A single word, sorry, actually, let me rephrase, immediately followed by the corrected version, moving the sentence forward without dwelling on the small slip that just happened. Here's the deeper reason this matters so much, and it's worth sitting with for a moment. Customers do not expect perfection from a live, real conversation. Nobody speaks perfectly all the time, including native speakers, including the most experienced agents on any team, including, frankly, the person listening to this podcast right now in their own native language in ordinary daily conversation. What customers actually respond to, what genuinely builds or erodes trust is composure. A small mistake corrected smoothly and confidently barely registers. A small mistake met with visible panic, prolonged apology, or awkward silence registers strongly, not because the original mistake was large, but because the reaction to it signaled uncertainty far louder than the mistake itself ever did. This is genuinely one of the most freeing ideas in this entire 3 hours. So let's say directly one more time. You're allowed to make mistakes on live calls. Every single agent does constantly throughout their entire career, no matter how experienced they become. The goal was never to eliminate every possible mistake before you get back on the phone. That's not a realistic goal for any human being speaking a language live under pressure in real time. The actual goal, the one worth genuinely working toward, is building a small, reliable set of patterns that are automatic enough to reduce how often mistakes happen, and building enough composure and self correction skill to handle the ones that inevitably still slip through smoothly, calmly, and without drawing extra attention to them. Let's take stock of where we are right now, because we have covered an enormous amount of ground together, and I want to make sure the shape of everything is clear before we move toward bringing this all together. We started with why grammar matters so specifically on live calls more than almost anywhere else. Language gets used because voice alone, without any visual cues, carries the entire impression of competence and trustworthiness. We move through verb tenses, subject verb agreement, articles, prepositions, countable and uncountable nouns, word order in questions, modal verbs, phrasal verbs, easily confused word pairs, the full range of conditional sentences, pronoun case, company and team agreement, a set of ready to use call phrases, reported speech, double negatives, comparatives and superlatives, gerunds and infinitives, pronunciation traps, make versus do, say versus tell versus speak versus talk, numbers and dates spoken naturally, formality calibration, less versus fewer, much versus many, advice versus advice, and finally the genuinely essential skill of correcting yourself smoothly when a mistake happens anyway. That's a complete practical toolkit built specifically around the real live high pressure environment of an actual customer service call, not a classroom, not a textbook, not a quiet room with time to think. Before we move into wrapping everything up, let's cover a few more patterns that come up constantly, specifically in return customer service, communication, chat, responses, email follow ups, and call summary notes, because so much of a modern customer service role blends live speech with written text, often within the very same shift, and a habit that's invisible in speech becomes very visible in the moment it's typed. Let's start with its and its, a pair that causes constant confusion precisely because the apostrophe rule here works backward from what most people expect. It's with an apostrophe. With an apostrophe is always a contraction short for its, or it has nothing else ever. It's without an apostrophe is the possessive form showing something belongs to it. The system updates its setting automatically is incorrect. The system updated its settings automatically is incorrect because settings belong to the system, a possessive relationship. So the correct version is the system updated its settings automatically. Compare it always been updated where it correctly stands. It for it has. Here's the mental test worth running every single time you're unsure, and it works reliably every time. Try expanding its into it is or it has and see if the sentence still makes sense. The system updated it is settings automatically clearly doesn't work, which tells you the correct choice is the possessive. It's no apostrophe. It is already been updated doesn't quite work grammatically either on its own, but it has already been updated does. Confirming it's with the apostrophe is the correct there. This simple expansion test resolves the its versus its confusion essentially every single time without needing to memorize an abstract rule. Let's cover you are following the exact same underlying logic because the same expansion test applies here too. You are is a contraction short for you are. Your is possessive showing something belongs to you. You're going to receive a confirmation email should be you are going to receive a confirmation email because the intended meaning is you are going to receive, not something belonging to you. Compare that to please confirm your email address where your correctly shows possession, the email addresses belonging to the customer. Let's run the expansion test on a few more examples back to back because this pair shows up constantly in written customer service communication, and getting it consistently right is one of the clearest, fastest signals of careful professional writing. You're welcome to reach out anytime. Expanded you are welcome to reach out anytime works perfectly. Confirming you are correct, you are is correct. Please check your account settings. Try expanding. Please check you are account settings. Clearly doesn't work. Confirming your possessive is correct here instead. We appreciate your patience while we look into this. Expand. We appreciate your you are patience doesn't work. Confirming your is correct. Now let's move into a genuinely different practical category, specific vocabulary and phrasing for troubleshooting and technical explanation, because this comes up constantly in a huge share of customer service calls, and having a small set of precise natural sounding phrases ready to go makes technical explanations sound noticeably more confident and clear. Here's a common awkward phrasing that shows up when agents are trying to describe a technical problem. The problem is happening because of the server, versus the more natural, more precise, the issue is being caused by a server delay on our end. Notice the shift being caused by rather than happening because of tends to sound more precise and professional in a technical explanation, and specifying exactly what on our end means. A server delay, a system update, a temporary outage gives the customer something concrete rather than a vague unspecified problem. Let's build a small practical vocabulary set specifically for troubleshooting language, because these phrases come up constantly across nearly every technical support call, regardless of the specific product or service involved. To reproduce an issue, meaning to make the same problem happen again deliberately in order to understand it better. Let me try to reproduce this issue on my end. To isolate a problem, meaning to narrow down exactly what's causing something, we need to isolate whether this is a device issue or a network issue. To roll back a change, meaning to undo a recent update or modification, we can roll back the recent update if it's causing problems. To escalate a case meaning to pass it to a higher level of support or authority. I'm going to escalate this to our technical specialist. To flag an account meaning to mark it for special attention or follow up. I'll flag your account so the next agent has full context. Let's practice using each of these naturally in a complete realistic call sentence, because vocabulary like this used confidently and correctly genuinely changes how technically credible an agent sounds to a customer, especially one who's already a little anxious about a complicated problem. Let me try to reproduce this issue on my end. Before we go any further, I want to isolate whether this is happening on your device specifically or across your whole network. If rolling back the recent update doesn't help, I'll escalate this to our specialist team right away. I have flagged your account so that if you need to call back, the next agent will already have the full picture. Say each one slowly and notice how naturally the specific technical verbs reproduce, isolate, roll back, escalate, flag, sit inside, otherwise completely normal conversational sentences, adding precision without adding stiffness. Here's one more small but genuinely useful phrase pattern specifically for the moment an agent needs to explain that a fix might take a little more time or effort than a simple immediate answer. Rather than this might take some time, which is vague and can feel slightly evasive to an anxious customer. A more precise, more reassuring version specifies what's actually happening during that time. This may take a few extra minutes while I dig into the account history, or this could take up to 24 hours while our technical team investigates the root cause. Specificity, even when the exact outcome is still uncertain, tends to feel far more reassuring to a customer than vague reassurance alone, because it signals that a real concrete process is underway rather than an open-ended, undefined wait. Let's cover one more genuinely important area before we move toward closing, because it sits slightly outside strict grammar, but it depends heavily on getting grammar right in order to land correctly, and that's the language of empathy and softening. The specific phrases agents use to acknowledge frustration, deliver difficult news, and generally soften the emotional edge of a conversation without sounding insincere or overly scripted. Here's a mistake that shows up constantly, and it's not exactly a grammar error in the strict sense. It's a mismatch between the words chosen and the emotional tone the moment actually requires. I understand your frustration, said flatly in the exact same tone used to confirm an account number, tends to land as hollow, almost robotic, precisely because the words are doing emotional work that the flat delivery isn't supporting. This connects back to something we touched on earlier with modal verbs and certainty. The words you choose carry a promise about how much you actually mean them, and empathy phrases specifically depend on matching tone to content more than almost any other sentence type on a call. Let's build a small set of empathy phrases that tend to land as genuine rather than scripted, because the specific wording matters here more than in almost any other category we have covered. I can absolutely understand why that would be frustrating. Tends to land more genuinely than to the flatter. I understand your frustration, partly because absolutely understand why that would be signals active reasoning about the customer's specific situation rather than a generic pre-written acknowledgement that sounds really stressful, especially with the deadline you mentioned references something specific the customer actually said, which signals real listening rather than a rehearsed script being read aloud. Here's a pattern worth locking in specifically because It comes up constantly whenever an agent needs to deliver news the customer won't be happy to hear, leading directly with the bad news. Unfortunately, we can't process that refund, tends to land more harshly than softening the delivery slightly. First, without burying or hiding the actual information, I have looked into this carefully, and unfortunately, in this specific case, we are not able to process a refund. Here's what I can offer instead. Notice the bad news is still delivered clearly and honestly. Nothing is hidden or softened into vagueness, but it's framed within a sentence that signals genuine effort. I have looked into this carefully and immediately followed by a constructive next step. Here's what I can offer instead, rather than simply ending on the negative. Let's talk about want versus would like a pair connected directly to the formality calibration we covered earlier, because want on its own can sometimes land a slightly blunt or demanding in certain sentence positions, especially when it's describing what the agent wants from the customer rather than what the agent is offering to do for them. I want you to confirm your account number can land as slightly abrupt compared to the softer I would like you to confirm your account number, or even softer still, could you confirm your account number for me? Notice would like and could you both introduce a small layer of politeness that want its own doesn't quite carry, even though all three sentences are asking for exactly the same thing. Here's an important nuance worth naming because it prevents an overcorrection in the opposite direction. Want is completely appropriate, even preferably when an agent is expressing their own genuine intention to help. I want to make sure this gets fully resolved for you, lands as warm and genuine precisely because want here expresses the agent's own sincere motivation, not a request placed on the customer. The distinction isn't that want is inherently wrong, it's about direction. wants Want tends to land more warmly when it's expressing what you intend to do for the customer, and would like or could you tend to land more politely when you're asking the customer for something in return. Let's practice this distinction with a few paired examples, because hearing the direction shift agent to customer versus customer to agent is exactly what makes this pattern click into place. I want to help you get this sorted out today. Warm agent expressing their own intention. Would you mind confirming your date of birth for verification? Polite asking something of the customer. I really want to find a solution that works for you. Warm agent's own genuine motivation. Could you hold for just one moment while I check that? Polite, a request placed on the customer. Say each one slowly and notice how naturally want fits the warm, self-directed sentences, while would, like, would you, and could you fit the polite customer-directed request. Let's close this section with one final practical empathy pattern, because it comes up constantly, specifically in the moment right after a customer has explained a frustrating problem and it's worth having completely automatic ready to go the instant it's needed. Acknowledge specifically and then move to action without lingering too long in either direction. That's frustrating, especially since this is the second time it's happened. Let's get this fixed properly today. Notice the shape, a specific acknowledgement referencing exactly what the customer described, immediately followed by a clear forward moving action step. This shape, acknowledge specifically, then act, is genuinely one of the most reliable, most broadly useful patterns in all of customer service communication, and it depends quietly on nearly everything we have covered today. Correct tense to describe what happened, correct modal verbs to signal genuine commitment, natural unforced phrasing rather than something that sounds stiff or overly formal, and the more composure and the composure to deliver it smoothly in one clean, confident breath. Let's cover one more small cluster before we move into wrapping up. Three words that show up in nearly every single call, already, yet, and still, because they each signal a slightly different relationship to time, and mixing them up can genuinely confuse a customer about whether something is done, still, pending, or hasn't started at all. Already signals something happened sooner than expected or is confirming completion. I have already checked your account and everything looks correct, yet is used specifically in negative sentences and questions asking whether something has happened up to this point. The refund hasn't processed yet, but it should within a few hours. Has the update installed yet? Still signals something is continuing, ongoing, often longer than expected. We are still investigating the cause of the delay. Notice how differently these land. The refund hasn't processed yet sounds like a normal expected pending state, while the refund is still not processed can sound slightly more like an ongoing problem, even describing the exact same situation purely because still carries a faint suggestion of unwanted duration that yet doesn't. Here's the mistake: live on a call. I have yet checked your account mixes already's job into yet's structure, yet doesn't work this way in a positive statement like this. The correct version is either I have already checked your account or I haven't checked your account yet, depending on which is actually true. Let's drill the three side by side in sentences pulled directly from real call situations. I've already sent that confirmation email. Your package hasn't shipped yet, but it will by tomorrow. We are still working on resolving this for you. Say each one slowly and notice already sits comfortably in positive statements about completion, yet sits specifically in negative statements and questions about whether something has happened, and still signals an ongoing, continuing state, whether that state is expected or a little longer than hoped. Let's move into one final grammar pattern: relative pronouns, which, that, and who. The small words used to add extra information about something you have just mentioned, because this pattern shows up constantly whenever an agent is describing a policy, a product, or a specific situation in more detail, and a small mix up here is common enough to be worth covering directly. Here's the core rule, and it's genuinely simple once it's named clearly. Who refers to people never thinks. That refers to things and can refer to people in casual speech, though who is generally preferred for people in professional context, which refers to things and is specifically used when the extra information is additional detail not essential to identifying which thing you mean. Here's the mistake: live on a call. The department which handles billing is currently closed. Technically works, but department is often more naturally paired with that in this kind of essential identifying description. The department that handles billing is currently closed sounds slightly more natural to most ears, though both are genuinely acceptable here. The distinction that actually matters most professionally is who versus that. For people, the representative that helped you yesterday has left a note on your account is more understandable, but the more polished, more professional version uses a who. For a person, the representative who helped you yesterday has left a note on your account. This small swap that becomes who whenever the extra information is about a person is worth locking in specifically, because customer service sentences constantly describe people: the agent who took your call, the technician who visited your home, the supervisor who approved this exception, and who consistently lands as the more polished, more professional choice in every one of these. Let's practice this pattern for a few times back to back, because it's a small, easy fix that consistently adds a layer of polish to sentences describing people specifically. The specialist who reviewed your case will follow up personally. This is the promotion that applies to your account type. The technician who's scheduled to visit will call ahead first. Here's the plan that best matches what you're looking for. Say each one slowly and notice who consistently attaches to people, and the specialist, the technician, while that consistently attaches to things, the promotion, the plan, a clean, simple, reliable split that's easy to apply correctly every single time once you're listening for it specifically. Let's cover one more pattern before we fully move into closing, because it's short, genuinely common, and easy to fix permanently once you hear it explained clearly, and that's expressing purpose, explaining why an action is being taken using an infinitive. Here's the mistake live on a call. I'm going to transfer you for to speak with billing. For to combine together like this doesn't exist as a structure in standard English, even though it feels like a reasonable way to express purpose, because several languages do combine a word like for with an infinitive in exactly this way. In English, purpose is expressed with a plain infinitive on its own, no for attached in front of it. I'm going to transfer you to speak with billing. Simple, clean, no for needed at all. Let's drill this specific pattern, because once you hear the corrected version enough times, the for tends to drop away naturally and permanently. I'm calling to confirm your appointment, not I'm calling to confirm. We sent this email to explain the recent changes, not to explain for. I need your account number to verify your identity, not for to verify. Say each one slowly and notice the infinitive to confirm, to explain, to verify stands completely on its own, doing the full job of expressing purpose with nothing extra needed in front of it. Now let's cover one more small but genuinely useful distinction, since, because, and as, three words that can all introduce a reason but carry slightly different weight and tone, and mixing them up isn't exactly wrong, but knowing the difference adds a layer of precision worth having, because is the most direct, most neutral way to introduce a reason, and it's almost always a safe, correct choice. We are issuing a refund because the item arrived damaged, since and as both can introduce a reason to, but they tend to carry a slightly softer, more assumed tone, often used when the reason is something already understood or fairly obvious to both people in the conversation. Since you're already a premium member, this upgrade is included at no extra cost. As you mentioned earlier, the issue started right after the update. Here's a small trap worth knowing, connecting back to something we covered earlier when we discussed verb tenses. Since also has a completely different job, marking a starting point in time. I have been a customer since 2019, and it's worth keeping these two uses mentally separate. Since meaning because versus mean, since meaning starting from this point in time, so you don't accidentally blend the two meanings into a single confusing sentence. Since you called yesterday, we have processed your refund could genuinely be read either way, as a reason because you called yesterday, or as a time frame starting from when you called yesterday until now, when there's any real risk of that kind of ambiguity, because is often the safer, clearer choice, specifically because it can only ever mean one thing, a reason, nothing else. Let's run through a final check, quick drill, combining everything from this section, because these small connecting words for purpose and because, since, as, for, reason come up constantly, threaded through nearly every explanation an agent gives across an entire shift. I'm reaching out to confirm a few details on your account because the payment failed twice we have temporarily paused the subscription. Since you have already verified your identity, we can proceed directly to the next step. As this is a known issue affecting multiple customers, our engineering team is already working on a fix. Say each one slowly and notice how cleanly each purpose and reason connector does its specific job. No unnecessary words added, no confusion about which meaning is intended. Before we move fully into the close, let's take one more short pass over the ground we have covered, because hearing the full shape of it one final time is exactly what helps it settle into long term memory rather than fading the moment this episode ends. We began with why grammar matters to specifically on a live call more than almost anywhere else language gets used, because voice alone carries the entire impression of competence. From there, we built outward tense, agreement, articles, prepositions, countable and uncountable nouns, question word order, modals, phrasal verbs, easily confused words, all four conditional types, pronouns, company and team agreement, ready to use phrases, reported speech, negatives, comparatives, gerunds and infinitives, pronunciation, make and do, say and tell and speak and talk, numbers and dates, formality, less and fewer, much and many, graceful, self-correction, it's, your and your, troubleshooting, vocabulary, empathy, phrasing, want and would like, already and yet and still, relative pronouns, infinitives of purpose and since and because and as. Every single one of these threads back to the same root idea, a structure that makes complete sense in one language applied directly onto a different one where it works slightly differently, and every single one is fixable through noticing, then correcting, then repeating until it becomes automatic. Let's bring everything together now, because we have covered a genuinely enormous amount of ground over these last few hours. And before we close, I want to hand you something more useful than a list to memorize, a way of thinking about all of it that will actually stick long after the specific rules start to blur together in your memory, which they will, and that's completely fine. Here's the biggest lesson, the one thread running underneath every single pattern we have walked through today, every mistake we covered, every single one comes from the exact same root cause, a structure that makes complete logical sense in one language applied directly into English, where the structure works differently. That's not a flaw in you, that's not evidence that you're bad at grammar or that English is somehow beyond your reach. It's simply what happens when a genuinely intelligent, capable mind is doing real time translation work live under pressure while simultaneously listening, typing, and managing another human being's emotions. The fact that you are doing that at all successfully hundreds of times a day is honestly remarkable, and it's worth recognizing that before anything else. Here's the second big lesson, and I think it might be the most practically useful idea in this entire 3 hours. You do not need to fix everything at once. You do not need to walk away from this episode with all of it perfectly internalized starting tomorrow morning. Real lasting improvement in a live spoken skill works through layering. One pattern becomes automatic, freeing up just a little more mental space, which then makes room for the next pattern to start settling in. Trying to fix all of it simultaneously isn't just unrealistic, it's actually counterproductive, because it splits your attention so thin that nothing gets the repetition it needs to become truly automatic. So here's a genuinely practical way to move forward from here, a small set of concrete action steps, because I don't want this episode to be something you listen to once and enjoyed only for the specifics to fade within a week. First, pick exactly one pattern from everything we covered today, the one that felt most familiar, the one where you thought, yes, I do that, I have heard myself say that. Just one, write it down somewhere. You will actually see it, a sticky note or your monitor, a note on your phone, somewhere you will glance at regularly during a shift. Second, for the first next 5 to 7 days, simply notice that one pattern on your calls without pressure, without judgment. You don't need to catch every instance, you don't need to be perfect. You just need to start noticing when it comes up, because noticing is the first essential step before correcting becomes possible at all. Third, once noticing starts to feel easy, almost automatic, start actively correcting it in the moment. Use the graceful self correction technique we practiced, a brief calm correction immediately followed by moving the sentence forward. No extended apology, no visible embarrassment. Fourth, once that one pattern starts to feel genuinely automatic, something you rarely even have to think about anymore, come back to this episode or to your own notes from it and pick the next pattern. Repeat the exact same process. Notice, then correct, then automate, one layer at a time over a period of months, not days. This quite steady one pattern at a time approach compounds into something genuinely significant, a noticeably more confident, more polished way of speaking on every single call, built not through cramming everything at once but through patient, consistent, targeted practice. I want to leave you with one final thought, because I think it matters more than any individual grammar rule we have covered today. Every single mistake we have walked through is in this episode is fixable. Everyone, none of them reflects a permanent limitation. None of them means you are not cut out for this work. None of them is evidence of anything other than the simple human fact that you learned English differently than a native speaker did, in a different order, through different methods, often as an adult juggling work, study, and everything else life demands. That's not a disadvantage. That can't be overcome. It's simply a different starting point, and every agent who sounds smooth, confident, and completely natural on live calls started exactly where you're starting, noticing one pattern at a time, correcting it patiently, and building call by call, shift by shift, the kind of quiet, automatic fluency that no longer requires conscious effort. You already have the hardest part done. You're doing the actual work live every single day, helping real people solve real problems under real pressure in a language that isn't the one you grew up dreaming in. Everything we covered today isn't about becoming someone different. It's about giving the skill you already have, real genuine skill at listening, solving problems, and caring about the person on the other end of the line, and the clean, confident, natural delivery it deserves. If this episode helped you, even just one pattern, one sentence, one small shift in how a phrase comes out of your mouth on your next call, that's a genuine win, and it's worth carrying forward, however small it might feel in the moment. Come back to this whenever you need a refresher, whether that's next week or next year, because this single pattern we covered today will still be exactly as useful the 10th time you hear it as it was the first. Subscribe now or follow so the next episode reaches you automatically. Share it with a colleague who might be working through the exact same patterns you are. And if there's a specific grammar pattern, a specific kind of call, or a specific challenge you would love to hear covered in a future episode, hold on to that thought, because that's exactly the kind of real practical topic this show exists to cover. Thank you for spending these 3 hours here working through every single one of these patterns with real focus and real patience, because that kind of sustained attention is exactly what turns a long episode like this into lasting practical skill rather than something briefly interesting and quickly forgotten. Go take your next call with a little more confidence than you had before you pressed play, and I'll talk to you in the next one.